Hey everyone. Welcome back to No Harry. Get ready for an amazing tale. What if Harry collapsed in Dumbledore's office and woke up as Lord of all four founder houses? Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Here we go. Chapter 1. The weight of inheritance. The office smelled like old smoke and something sweeter underneath it. Candied almonds, maybe, or parchment that had been read so many times it had developed its own particular warmth. Harry had always noticed that smell when he was nervous. Tonight it felt like it was trying to soothe him, and he resented it. "You're not listening to me." Dumbledore looked up from behind his desk with the particular expression Harry had come to hate this year, that quiet, measured calm, the kind that said, "I hear you, child, but I know better." His half-moon glasses caught the glow of the portraits lining the walls, all of them pretending to be asleep, all of them listening. "I am listening, Harry. You're doing it again." Harry's voice cracked on the last word, which made him furious. He'd been in this office for 20 minutes and he was already unraveling. Snape's lesson that afternoon had seen to that. An hour of having his mind ripped open like a wound that kept being picked at, memories scattered and exposed, his mum's face, Cedric hitting the ground, the graveyard full of shadows, and then Snape had simply stood there, robes immaculate, expression unmoved, and said, "Occlumency requires discipline, Potter. Something you clearly lack. You're sitting there being all understanding, while I'm telling you that Snape is making it worse. Whatever Voldemort's doing to my head, Snape is, Professor Snape. I don't care." And he meant it. He genuinely, bone deep didn't care anymore. He's making it worse. Every session he goes in there and tears everything up and I can't close anything. Everything's open. I can feel Voldemort's mood like it's weather, like it's just there, and he stopped. Pressed the heel of his hand against his scar. It wasn't burning, not exactly, but there was a pressure behind it, constant and low, like a note held past its natural end. "You won't even look at me this year. You won't talk to me properly. You treat me like I'm something that might explode. You are carrying a great deal of, don't." The word came out sharper than he intended. One of the instruments on the shelf nearest to Harry gave a small, startled trill, like it had been jostled. Neither of them looked at it. "Don't tell me about burdens. Tell me something real. Tell me why Snape is still teaching me when it's obviously not working. Tell me what the prophecy says. Don't look at me like that. I know there's a prophecy, I've known for months. Tell me something true, and stop." His voice dropped without him meaning to, gone thin and strange in a way that didn't sound like himself. "Stop sitting behind that desk and managing me." The silence that followed had texture to it. Dumbledore set down his quill slowly. Fawkes, perched on his stand near the window, opened one amber eye and then both, watching Harry with an attention that felt almost medical. "Harry," Dumbledore said, and there was something different in his voice now, something that might have been genuine. "You're right. I owe you more honesty than I've given you this year. If you'll sit." "I don't want to sit." Nevertheless. It wasn't a command. It was almost a request. "Please." Harry sat. Not because he was told to, but because his legs had suddenly decided they were finished. He dropped into the chair across from the desk and the movement jarred something, a spike of pressure behind his eyes, fast and mean, and he gripped the armrests because the room had tilted slightly. "Harry," the pressure didn't stop. It built. Like a fist closing around the inside of his skull. He'd felt this before, briefly, in pieces, after bad dreams, after Snape's lessons, but never like this. This was different. This was something responding to something else, two forces pressing against each other in the space behind his forehead, and Harry thought, distantly, this is what it feels like when a dam cracks, and then the crack became a roar and the world went sideways and he was aware of Dumbledore rising sharply to his feet, of Fawkes crying out once, of the instruments on every shelf singing in sudden unison like something had struck them all at once, and then nothing. It wasn't unconsciousness, exactly. It was more like being submerged. Harry was aware of the dark, and aware that the dark was warm, and that was strange because dark had never been warm before. The darkness inside his cupboard under the stairs had been cold. The dark of bad dreams was cold. This was warm and deep and old in a way that had nothing to do with years, old like stone, old like the first time fire understood itself. He was lying on something. Stone. He could feel the grain of it through his robes. He could also feel, and this was the part that was harder to make sense of, the castle. Not metaphorically. He could feel Hogwarts the way you feel a house you grew up in when you walk back through the door, that bone-level recognition. He could feel the weight of the North Tower 3 floors up and the cold of the dungeons below and the restlessness of the lake outside, and all of it connected to him with the easy intimacy of things that had always been his without his knowing it. Hello, he thought, and didn't know who he was saying it to. The warmth deepened. Something answered, not in words, not in anything as small as words, but in the way a great instrument answers when you strike the right note. Everything resonating at once. Yes. Here. Finally. Then the voices started. Not many. 4. Very distinct. The first was a woman whose voice had the particular quality of someone used to being heard across a large room, warm and practical and carrying an accent he couldn't place. "You're much thinner than I expected," she said, and somehow he knew she meant it kindly. "That'll sort itself out." The second was a man whose voice had edges to it, bright, quick edges, like a blade that was also somehow laughing. "He's got the look. Bit scrawny about the shoulders but that's temporary. Look at the hands, Helga." The third was a woman and she sounded like books, somehow, like the particular silence inside a library, like the pause before understanding. "The blood is correct," she said, very precisely. "All 4 lines. Convergent. I calculated this might happen but I confess I didn't expect to feel it so clearly." The fourth voice said nothing for a long moment. When it spoke, it was low and deliberate and Harry's scar prickled almost in recognition, not pain, but awareness. "The Slytherin line was diluted," the voice said. "Not broken. There's a difference. He has always carried it." Then the first voice again, practical and warm, "Yes, yes, we've all established that he qualifies. More importantly, he's awake." Harry opened his eyes. The ceiling of Dumbledore's office swam into focus. He was lying on the floor. There was a cushion under his head that hadn't been there before. Fawkes was sitting beside him with the calm of something that had seen worse and fully intended to see worse again, one golden wing half extended, radiating heat. "Don't try to sit up quickly," said Dumbledore, who was crouched beside him with an expression Harry had never seen on his face before. Something between wonder and a grief so old it had gone quiet. "Give yourself a moment." Harry sat up quickly. His head rang once and went still. "How long was I out?" "Approximately 4 minutes." Dumbledore's eyes hadn't left him. There was something in his gaze that was almost hungry. Not cruelly, but the way a scholar looks at a text they've spent a lifetime trying to decipher. "Harry. Do you feel, can you describe what you're experiencing?" Harry opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked down at his hands. On the ring finger of his right hand there was a ring he had never seen before. It looked old, not worn, but settled, the way things look when they belong where they are. The band was dark metal, almost black, but as he tilted his hand it shifted, caught the candlelight and showed red, then gold, then a deep forest green that darkened to silver. 4 colors. The stone in the center was small and clear and when Harry looked at it directly it seemed to have no color at all, or perhaps every color, and he had the distinct impression it was looking back. "Right," Harry said. "That's new." "That," Dumbledore said quietly, "is rather a significant understatement." Harry stood up. He did it easily, which surprised him. He'd expected to feel terrible, post-collapse terrible, but instead he felt extraordinarily clear. Like after a long sleep. Like after a fever breaks. He flexed his right hand once and felt the ring settle against his finger with a solidity that was almost comforting. He also felt the castle. Still. A constant presence at the edge of his awareness, like knowing where every door in a familiar house is without having to look. "Tell me what it is," he said. Dumbledore stood as well, slowly. He was quiet for a moment, gathering himself. Harry had the impression the gathering wasn't for his benefit, it was because Dumbledore himself needed it. When Hogwarts was founded, Dumbledore began, each of the 4 founders embedded something of themselves in the castle's magic. Not a spell, exactly. Something older. A recognition. An intention. He moved to the window, looking out over the darkened grounds, and his voice took on the cadence of someone reciting something they had long known but perhaps never expected to say aloud. They were aware, even then, that the 4 houses would diverge over time. That their philosophical differences would calcify into faction. They hoped, and this is something very few scholars know, that one day there would be a student who carried the blood of all 4 lines. Not as a political symbol. As a resolution. A resolution, Harry repeated flatly. Of what? Of the argument that has been tearing this school apart since Slytherin left it. Dumbledore turned from the window. The castle was designed to recognize such a person. To pass to them certain authorities. Rights. The ability to access parts of Hogwarts that have been sealed for centuries. And other things. His gaze dropped briefly to the ring. More active things. So I'm what, the heir of all 4 founders? Harry said it the way you'd say something you needed to hear out loud to decide if it was absurd. You carry the bloodline of each of the 4 founders through different ancestral lines, most of which have been hidden, lost to history, or deliberately obscured. Dumbledore sat down in his chair with the weariness of a very old man. The Potter family's Gryffindor descent has been known to me for some time. The Hufflepuff line comes through your mother's family, her Muggle ancestry is not as simple as it appears. The Ravenclaw line is tertiary, 3 generations back on your father's side. And the Slytherin line. He paused. Voldemort, Harry said. No. Dumbledore's voice was sharp, sharper than Harry expected. No. Your connection to Slytherin's blood predates Tom Riddle entirely. He is, in fact, a diluted inheritor of the same line you carry, and he diluted it further through his own choices. Magic responds to intent as much as blood, Harry. The Slytherin line in you is considerably more robust than his. In the ways that matter. The silence stretched. One of the portraits, an elderly which Harry didn't recognize, had given up the pretense of sleep entirely and was watching with her hands pressed together, expression rapt. Why now? Harry asked. Why tonight? Dumbledore's expression shifted. Something that might have been guilt. Severus's lessons have been vigorous. More so than I authorized. The fractures in your occlumency defenses allowed 2 things to happen simultaneously, Voldemort's connection pressed inward, and the castle's resonance pressed outward, searching. They collided. He looked at Harry steadily. I owe you an apology for that, Harry. I should have monitored the sessions more carefully. Yeah, Harry said. You should have. Dumbledore accepted this without defending himself. That was new, and Harry filed it away. The ring pulsed once, softly, against his finger. Harry looked at it. He thought, quite deliberately, about the room he was standing in, and felt the office respond. Not dramatically. A candle straightened itself. One of the sleeping instruments began to rotate slowly, then stopped. The fire in the grate flared briefly gold and went back to orange. Small things. But they answered him with the certainty of things answering their owner. Fawkes sang one perfect note and then went back to preening. Is Snape still going to try to teach me occlumency? Harry asked. I think, Dumbledore said slowly, that the situation may have evolved past the original problem. The connection Voldemort has been exploiting ran, in part, through the places in your mind that were undefended. The castle has now bridged those places. Sealed them with something Voldemort will find considerably harder to penetrate. So Snape's lessons will likely need to take a very different form. If they continue at all. Dumbledore pressed his fingertips together. I imagine the castle itself is a rather more formidable occlumency shield than anything Severus could construct. Harry considered this. Then he thought about Snape's face in the lesson that afternoon, the cold efficiency of it, the complete absence of anything that might be called care, and thought about how many more of those he'd been expecting to endure. Good, he said simply. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Turned back. The prophecy, he said. You said you owed me honesty. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. Yes. Tell me. Tonight. Not when you've decided I'm ready, not when it's convenient, tonight. Another silence. Dumbledore looked at him, really looked, the way he'd stopped doing this year, and Harry met it without flinching. The ring sat warm on his finger. The castle sat warm at the edge of his mind. He had the sudden, clear knowledge that he wasn't afraid of this man. Had perhaps never had a good reason to be. He was angry at him, and there was still something that might be called love in the mix, because Dumbledore had been the first adult who had ever acted like Harry's survival mattered, but afraid? No. Not tonight. Possibly not ever again. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, Dumbledore said quietly, and then he told him all of it. Harry walked back to Gryffindor Tower at 11:30 at night, which was well past curfew, and when he passed Filch going the other way up a staircase, Filch took one look at him and decided abruptly to go a different direction without saying a word. Harry didn't think much of it at the time. The common room was mostly empty. A couple of fifth years were still up, huddled over potions notes with the glazed dedication of people who had given up sleeping. Ron was asleep in an armchair with a Chudley Cannon's almanac open on his face. Hermione was sitting cross-legged on one of the sofas near the fire, reading something with the focused ferocity that meant she was either actually interested or deeply worried. When Harry came in she looked up, took in his expression, and put the book down. What happened? She asked. You look different. I'll tell you both. Ron, he nudged Ron's foot and the almanac slid to the floor. Ron jerked awake, looked around with the expression of someone who'd been fighting dragons in his sleep and was mildly disappointed to find himself in a common room. Wah, Harry. It's nearly midnight, mate. I know. Wake up properly. Something in his tone got through. Ron blinked, sat up, and looked at him with sudden alertness. Harry sat down across from them and told them. Not everything, not in the order it happened, more like the way you tell people things when you've been up close to something staggering and you're still working out which parts are real. The collapse. The warmth and the stone and the voices. The ring. Dumbledore's explanation. The prophecy, he told them the prophecy too, because they were his friends and they deserved to know. Hermione pressed her hands against her mouth while he talked and didn't interrupt once, which was notable. Ron went progressively more still the way he did when something was serious enough that his usual instinct toward commentary couldn't find purchase. When Harry finished, the fire crackled. Show me the ring, Hermione said. Harry extended his right hand. The ring caught the firelight and ran through its colors, red, gold, green, silver, all of it subtle, all of it unmistakable if you were looking. Hermione leaned forward and studied it with the expression she reserved for particularly important texts. The 4 founders, she said. All 4 bloodlines. Harry, do you realize how statistically, no, that's not important right now. She pulled back. How do you feel? Fine. Good, actually. He paused. The castle feels near. Like I can feel it. All of it. Can you tell what's in it? Ron asked. Like, who's where? Harry hadn't tried that. He tilted his attention inward the way he'd felt it go before. It was easy, the same ease as breathing, and felt the castle spread outward from him. The warm threads of sleeping students in their dormitories. The cold alertness of the staircases, which always felt slightly awake to him. The slow movement of something large in the lake. The specific density of the restricted section of the library, like a place holding its breath. "Filch is on the 3rd floor," he said. "There's a ghost in the astronomy tower, not one of the usual ones, I don't think, it's smaller. And there's someone in the library who shouldn't be there." Ron's eyebrows had gone very high. "That's mad." "Brilliant, but mad." "The prophecy," Hermione said, and her voice was steady but her hands weren't. She'd laced them together in her lap very deliberately. "Harry, neither can live while the other survives. That means, I know what it means. And you're all right. Because that's a lot too, Hermione." He looked at her. "I've spent 5 years being told, in various ways, that Voldemort is my problem to solve. I've died at least twice in dreams and woke up sweating in a cupboard, and I've watched people die, and I've been told I'm special and that I'm mad and that I'm a liar, and I've been given detentions for telling the truth." He turned the ring on his finger once, a thoughtful gesture. "Tonight someone, for someone's, I suppose, decided I was the right person to give this to. I think I'm going to trust that." Ron was quiet for a moment. Then he said, right then, in the tone he used when he'd made a decision and wasn't interested in revisiting it. "What do we do first?" Harry almost smiled. "I don't know yet. But I want to find out what these authorities actually mean. What I can actually do." Dumbledore mentioned places in the castle that have been sealed. "The Founder's records," Hermione said immediately, and her eyes had gone bright in the way that meant she'd already been thinking about this for 30 seconds and had worked out 4 angles. "Harry, if you have access to sealed parts of the castle, there could be things in there that nobody's been able to access for 1,000 years. Original magical theory, historical records, maybe even, Hermione," Ron said patiently. "The point is," she said, reining herself in with visible effort, "we should be careful. Methodical. We don't know the extent of what's been given to you, and rushing in could." "I'm not going to rush," Harry said. "I'm going to find out what I need to know. There's a difference." He stretched, and the firelight caught the ring again, and he had the particular feeling, not arrogance, something quieter and more settled than arrogance, of someone who has been given a tool and can feel already that it fits their hand. "But first I'm going to sleep. Tomorrow we start." He slept better than he had in months. No dreams. When he woke up, the room was grey with early morning and his dorm mates were still asleep, and he lay there for a moment with his right hand raised and looked at the ring in the dim light. It was really there. He could feel the castle's quiet morning, the kitchen elves beginning their work, the slow creak of old stonework adjusting to the cold, the olary full of sleeping birds. He got up, got dressed, and went downstairs. Neville was in the common room. Up early, as he sometimes was, sitting near the window with a herbology textbook, eating a piece of toast he'd clearly smuggled up from breakfast the day before. He looked up when Harry appeared. "You're up early," Neville said. "Couldn't stay in bed." Harry dropped into the nearest chair. "You. Mandrake repotting diagram. I keep getting the." He stopped. Looked at Harry's hand. "Is that a new ring?" "Yeah." Neville looked at it for a long moment with the careful attention he brought to things in herbology, thorough, unhurried, pattern-seeking. "Those colors," he said slowly. "That's all 4 houses." "Yes." Neville set down his toast. He looked at Harry with an expression that wasn't surprise. "Exactly." It was more like something that had been half expected finally becoming explicit. Neville Longbottom, Harry had always thought, was underestimated precisely because he wasn't loud about the things he knew. "Is this why Filch practically ran from you last night? Seamus heard him telling Mrs. Norris that he'd seen you in the corridor and something was off about the air around him." "Something was off about the air around you?" "Yes." Harry looked at his own hands. He thought about the castle. He could feel the Ollery had just gotten busier, the post was coming in. I had a rough night. And then something happened that changed, a few things. Neville looked at him steadily. Good changed or bad changed? Harry considered. Changed in the direction I needed things to change. Neville picked up his toast again. All right, he said, and went back to his diagram. After a moment he added, without looking up, whatever it is, I'm with you, you know. Whatever you need. I just figured that was worth saying out loud. Harry looked at him. Neville's face was earnest and calm and utterly undeceived about what he was offering. Thanks, Neville, Harry said, and meant it more than he could easily say. The great hall at breakfast was the same as it always was, noise, owls, the smell of kippers and burnt toast, the 4 house tables running parallel like old roads. Harry walked in with Ron and Hermione flanking him and took his usual seat, and it was almost normal for about 4 minutes. Then Draco Malfoy, 3 seats down on the Slytherin table, caught the glint of the ring across the hall. Harry saw the exact moment it registered. Malfoy's eyes sharpened, moved from the ring to Harry's face, and something complicated happened in his expression, not quite shock, not quite recognition, something between the two that suggested the Malfoy family had perhaps been told things about founder inheritance that most people hadn't. Harry met his gaze and held it without particular expression. Malfoy looked away first. He noticed, Ron said, mouth full of toast. Yes. Is that going to be a problem? Harry poured himself some pumpkin juice. I don't know yet. Maybe not the problem you'd expect. Hermione had a book open beside her plate. She'd gotten up at 7 to retrieve it from her room, something about founding histories and hereditary magic, which she'd apparently been reading since October in a general kind of way and was now reading with rather more focused intent. Harry, she said, without looking up. It says here that the last confirmed founder's heir who was recognized by the castle's enchantments was in 1357, and he only carried the Gryffindor line. The recognition gave him certain, the text calls them ius rectoris, rights of governance. He was able to override the headmaster's decisions regarding the castle. She looked up. That's the recorded precedent. And he only had 1 line. You have all 4. The implication hung in the air. Ron got there about half a second after Harry. You could override Dumbledore, he said. Or Umbridge, Harry said. Hermione's eyes went very intent. Or Umbridge. He thought about Dolores Umbridge, who had set up her office like a weapon and wielded educational decrees like a woman who had always confused power over people with power. Who gave detentions that left scars. Who had been systematically dismantling every part of Hogwarts that she couldn't control. The ring pulsed once, warm and decisive. Harry didn't make any decision out loud. He simply had breakfast. But something had been settled in the back of his mind with the quiet certainty of a key turning in a lock it was made for. The collision with Umbridge happened faster than he'd expected, and in a way he hadn't planned. He was in the corridor outside Transfiguration when she came around the corner with 2 of her inquisitorial squad, Pansy Parkinson and Warrington from Slytherin, both wearing their badges with the satisfaction of people who'd been given just enough power to become insufferable. Umbridge herself was dressed in her usual aggressive pink, her clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield, her smile the particular variety that had no warmth behind the teeth. Potter, she said, and the smile widened slightly. Out of class. Free period. He didn't break stride. Professor McGonagall can confirm. I was actually hoping to speak with you. She moved to intercept him, not quite blocking his path, but making her intention clear. I understand you were in the headmaster's office very late last night. Well past curfew. Yes. With the headmaster. Under what pretense? Harry stopped. He turned to face her slowly. Pretense? It isn't uncommon, she said sweetly, for students to invent reasons to seek special access to school leadership. Particularly students who have a pattern of attention-seeking behavior. He looked at her for a long moment. She was looking at his face, not his hands. He kept his right hand relaxed at his side. "Professor Umbridge," he said pleasantly, "I went to the headmaster's office because he asked me to. He confirmed it last night in front of the portraits. Any of them can verify that. Is there something else?" Her eyes went to his hand then. Just briefly. The ring caught the corridor light and she frowned, not recognition, but something triggered in her that she couldn't quite name. "What is that?" "A ring." "I can see it's a ring, Potter, I'm asking, it's mine." He said it without weight or emphasis, and that simplicity was somehow more effective than any defiance would have been. "Is there a rule against rings?" "I'd check your decrees, but I haven't seen one." Pansy Parkinson made a small sound that might have been a suppressed laugh and then converted it into a cough. Umbridge's smile had gone tight at the corners. "I'll be keeping a close eye on you, Potter." "I know," Harry said, with complete calm, and walked past her. Behind him he heard her footsteps stop. Heard the small silence that meant she was still standing there, watching him go, uncertain, for perhaps the first time since she'd arrived at Hogwarts, of what she was dealing with. He turned the corner and exhaled. Hermione, who had been 2 paces behind him the entire time and had managed to look like she was simply also going somewhere, fell into step beside him. "You didn't use the ring," she said quietly. "No. You could have. If what I read is right, you could have told her the castle revokes her classroom access and she'd have had to, I know." He glanced at her. "But I want to understand what I have before I use it. And I don't want the first thing I do to be that." "What do you want the first thing to be?" He thought about the sealed places Dumbledore had mentioned. He thought about the warm, ancient presence of the castle at the edges of his mind, patient as bedrock. He thought about 4 voices in the dark, and one of them sounding familiar in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "I want to find what they left behind," he said. "The Founders. If they knew this day was coming, and it sounds like they planned for it, they wouldn't have just left a ring and good wishes. There'd be something more," Hermione said immediately. "A room. A repository. Records. Or more than records." She was quiet for a second. "Harry, when you feel the castle, can you feel anything sealed? Anything that feels different from the rest?" He tilted his attention inward, the way he'd been doing all morning, getting more practiced at it the way you get more practiced at balancing on something. It became less conscious and more instinctive each time. He reached for the castle's geography and let it unfurl: tower, corridor, dungeon, ground floor, the deep foundations, and there, below the lake, below the dungeons, so far down he had to push to reach it, something answered. "Old and sealed and waiting." "Yes," he said. "I can feel exactly where it is." Hermione grabbed his arm. "Tonight," she said. "We go tonight." And he nodded, and the ring was warm on his finger all the way to their next class, and Hogwarts breathed quietly around him, a castle that had waited a very long time for someone to come home. That evening, just before dinner, a small owl arrived with a note that no one else at the Gryffindor table could see. It had been addressed in a handwriting that wasn't quite handwriting, more like letters formed by something that didn't have hands, precise and curling and unmistakably deliberate. Harry opened it. There was one line. "What's below the water has always been yours. The door will know you." He showed it to Ron and Hermione. Ron turned it over, looking for a signature. "Who sent this?" Harry looked up at the enchanted ceiling, where stars were beginning to resolve themselves out of the twilight blue. He thought about 4 voices in the warm dark. "I think," he said, "the castle did." Ron stared at the note for another moment. "Right," he said, "for the second time in 12 hours. Brilliant. Mad. Both." Harry folded the note carefully and put it in his pocket. The ring caught the light of a passing ghost. Tomorrow, the real education would begin. Chapter 2, What the Castle Knows. They went at midnight. Not because midnight had any particular magic to it, Harry had long since stopped believing that arbitrary hours held power, but because the castle's rhythms ran in that direction, and by 11:30 the last prefect patrol had finished and the corridors had gone still with the particular stillness of a large building settling into itself. Harry had spent dinner feeling the rout. He couldn't have explained it in words that would have satisfied a cartographer, but he knew it the way he knew the shape of his own bedroom in the dark. The location beneath the lake wasn't deep in some dramatic sense, wasn't miles underground, but it was sideways from where the dungeons ended, accessible through a passage that the castle was only now making available, a door that had simply appeared to Harry's awareness that afternoon like a word suddenly making sense in a sentence you'd read 100 times. Ron brought his chess set and then left it behind. Hermione brought 2 books and kept both. Harry brought his wand and the ring and the note, which he'd already memorized but kept anyway. They left the common room at 5 past midnight, moving through corridors Harry could feel the way a sailor feels wind, completely, instinctively, the small hairs of awareness rising when something changed. He knew where Filch was without having to check. He steered them clear of the second-floor landing without explanation and Ron trusted him well enough not to ask. The dungeons were cold but not unfamiliar. They passed the potions corridor and went further, past the point where Harry had ever had reason to go, and the stone changed character as they descended, not older exactly, but more deliberate, like the difference between walls that were built and walls that were constructed with purpose. Every stone here had been placed with the knowledge that someone was coming back. "It's getting warmer," Hermione whispered. It was. Not the warmth of fires or torches, there were no torches down here. A warmth from the stone itself, rising steadily as they moved. Harry stopped in front of a section of wall that looked identical to every other section of wall except that he could feel it like a held breath, like the moment before someone speaks. There was no handle, no keyhole, no carved inscription. Just stone. He pressed his right hand flat against it. The ring didn't glow or spark or do anything theatrical. But the stone shifted, not swinging open like a door, more like it simply decided to be somewhere else, and what had been solid wall became an opening. Beyond it, a staircase went down, and from below came a light that was pale and steady and older than any torch. "All right," Ron said quietly. That was brilliant. They went down. The room below the lake was not what Harry had expected, which meant it wasn't what any of them had imagined, which meant Hermione's expression as they reached the bottom of the staircase was something he would remember for a long time. It was large. Not dramatically large, not a cavern, not a cathedral, but a room of considered proportions, long enough that the far wall was dim, high enough that the ceiling was lost in shadow above the reach of the light. The light itself came from the walls, not torches or lanterns but the stone itself glowing with a cool, even luminescence that felt like concentrated moonlight, if moonlight had decided to commit to a career indoors. 4 chairs sat around a central table. Not thrones, chairs, solid and worn, each distinctly different. One was dark oak with heavy arms and a cushion that had gone red with age. One was lighter wood, almost golden, with a curved back, homelier than the others. One was narrow and precise, with geometric carvings along the legs. One was high-backed and severe and had clearly not been sat in comfortably by anyone who ever sat in it, but it had a presence that made you aware of it from across the room. "Oh," Hermione breathed. On the table between the chairs there were 4 objects. A sword, not the sword of Gryffindor, but something older, its blade dark and unadorned. A cup, golden, with badgers worked into the handles. A diadem, silver and delicate, with a sapphire at its center. And a locket, serpentine and green, which Harry recognized in his bones before his mind had caught up with what his bones were recognizing. "Don't touch them," Harry said, not because he knew they were dangerous but because he knew instinctively that they weren't for touching yet. They were for knowing. Like a room you walk into and feel you need to understand before you start moving furniture. "I wasn't going to," Hermione said, in the tone that suggested she'd absolutely been about to. Ron was looking at the walls. Between the strips of glowing stone there were carvings, not decorative, not symbolic, but written. Dense, running text that spiraled from floor to ceiling in 4 different scripts that shifted from one to another with no apparent border, as though 4 people had passed a quill between them without breaking the sentence. "Can you read it?" Harry asked Hermione. She moved to the nearest wall and held her wand up even though the light was already adequate. Her lips moved. Parts. The upper sections are in Old English, very old, pre-Norman. The section further down shifts to Latin, then to something I think is an early form of magical script, not quite runic but, Harry, some of this is instructional. It's not just history. It's telling someone how to use what's here. She looked back at him. Telling you how to use what's here. It's addressed in the second person. Second person meaning me specifically, or second person meaning whoever's standing here? Both, I think. One assumes the other. She turned back to the wall, already pulling a notebook from her robes. I'll need time to copy this. Some of it I'll need to translate properly. But Harry, she turned, and her expression was doing something rare, something between reverence and urgency, the 2 things at war in her face. The cup and the diadem. They're not Horcruxes. It's describing them as reservoirs. The founders stored magic in them. Actual stored magic, compounded over their lifetimes. If you can access, let me try something first, Harry said. He walked to the table. He stood between the 4 chairs and looked at the 4 objects and felt the ring align itself with something, a tuning, like an instrument finding its note. The sword, the cup, the diadem, the locket. 4 objects. 4 legacies. He didn't pick anything up. He just stood there and was conscious of them, the way you're conscious of people in a room when you know all of them well. The warmth came again. The deep warmth from the walls, except now it was coming from all 4 directions at once, from the objects and the chairs and the written walls, and it moved through the ring and into him with the easy completeness of a circuit closing. 4 voices, briefly, as they had been in the dark. He's ready, said the practical one, Helga Hufflepuff, he was almost certain of it now. He's always been ready, said the bright one with the laughing edges, and that was Gryffindor, he recognized the quality of it. He's appropriately prepared, said the precise one, Ravenclaw. He's here, said the last one simply, and that voice, with its careful depths and its old particular weight, was one Harry felt in the scar tissue of his history in ways that had nothing to do with fear anymore. He opened his eyes. He hadn't known they'd closed. Well? Ron said. I can feel all of it, Harry said. Not what it does yet. But that it's mine. That it's been waiting. He picked up the locket. It was heavier than it looked. The moment his fingers closed around it, a wave of Parseltongue-textured magic moved through him and then out, rippling the air, and 3 torches that Harry hadn't noticed in the corners of the room burst into flames simultaneously. Hermione made a small involuntary sound. The locket's clasp opened by itself. Inside, instead of a portrait or a lock of hair, there was a piece of parchment. Harry tilted it toward the light. The handwriting was Parseltongue, not the spoken language but a written form he'd never seen before, and yet he read it without effort, which was interesting. You are the resolution of my greatest regret, it said. I did not leave Hogwarts because I hated Muggleborns. I left because I had become afraid, and fear is the only real betrayal of magic. I give you what I kept back from Godric, in hopes that the combination does what I alone could not. Salazar. Harry read it twice. Folded it carefully. Held the locket for another moment, feeling its weight, and set it back. What did it say? Hermione asked. Her voice was very careful. That Slytherin left because he was afraid. He looked at the locket. And that he's sorry. The silence in the room had a different quality after that. Ron sat down carefully in Helga Hufflepuff's chair, the homely one with the curved back, and then looked startled at himself for having done it, and then decided it was fine and stayed. Hermione had gone back to the walls and was copying furiously. Harry sat in Gryffindor's chair. The dark oak one with the heavy arms. He sat in it and felt, very clearly, the difference between sitting in a chair and sitting in your chair, the one that was always waiting at the table. "Ron," he said. "Yeah. The Horcruxes." He'd been working toward this thought all day without quite getting there. Dumbledore thinks Voldemort made several. That's why he can't be killed, his soul is fractured, distributed. But if the cup and the diadem here are founder objects, he stopped. Thought. What are the other Horcruxes? What has Voldemort been collecting? Ron went still. Hermione's quill stopped scratching. He'd want founder objects, Hermione said slowly, turning from the wall. If he knows what they are, what they represent, he'd want to make them into Horcruxes. It would be a kind of statement. Desecration. He already has the locket, Harry said. Or he had it. And the cup, oh no, Hermione said. She had gone very white. Harry. The Horcrux Dumbledore mentioned that he thinks might be at Gringotts, he said it was in the Lestrange vault. What if it is the cup? What if Voldemort already got to it before? Then this is a duplicate, Harry said, looking at the cup on the table. Or the founders kept theirs here and Voldemort stole one from somewhere else. He shook his head. I don't think this is a Horcrux. What I felt when the ring connected with it, that was clean. Horcruxes feel like wounds. I've felt them before, in second year, and the diary felt like something diseased. This doesn't. You can feel the difference? Ron asked. Apparently. Ron leaned back in Hufflepuff's chair and crossed his arms. Right. So we've got a room full of founder artifacts, you can feel Horcruxes, and you've got the castle on your side. I feel like we're actually ahead for once. We're not ahead, Harry said. But we're not behind anymore. They stayed for 2 hours. Hermione filled 8 pages of notes and declared she could fill 80 more given adequate time. Ron fell asleep in Hufflepuff's chair, which Harry decided was probably the most comfortable he'd slept since term began. Harry spent most of the 2 hours with his attention split between the room and the castle. He was learning the difference between the castle's moods the way you learn to read a person's expressions, the small shifts and tells. Around 1 in the morning, the castle told him, without words, that Umbridge was walking the 4th floor corridor with a lantern and a clipboard, and for reasons Harry couldn't have fully explained, knowing exactly where she was without her knowing he knew was more satisfying than almost anything that had happened in weeks. He spent the rest of the time with Ravenclaw's diadem. He didn't put it on, he didn't think he was ready for what that would mean, and the walls had been fairly explicit about sequencing, from what Hermione had managed to translate. But he held it, and felt through it the specific quality of Rowena Ravenclaw's magic, which was unlike anything he'd encountered before. Gryffindor's magic felt like fire and forward motion. Hufflepuff's felt like deep roots, patient and structural. Slytherin's felt like water, adaptive, finding paths. Ravenclaw's felt like the moment just before understanding. The pause in which something assembles itself into clarity. He sat there holding it and felt himself think more clearly than he usually did, and he thought about the prophecy, neither can live while the other survives, and about what Dumbledore had told him tonight and what Salazar Slytherin's note had said about fear being the only real betrayal of magic, and something assembled in his mind with the slow deliberateness of a correct answer that was waiting to be recognized. Voldemort was afraid. Had always been afraid. The Horcruxes were fear. The Parseltongue dominance, the careful cruelty, the architecture of terror he'd built across 2 wars, all of it was someone who had been given a gift and become afraid of losing it and started hoarding in the way frightened people hoard. And Harry had been afraid too, this year especially. Afraid of what was in his head. Afraid of the prophecy. Afraid of Dumbledore's distance. Afraid of Snape's lessons. Afraid of the thing he could feel in the scar on bad nights, the intelligence behind it, cold and old and acquisitive. He wasn't afraid of it anymore. He put the diadem back. He looked at the 4 objects and the 4 chairs and the glowing walls and thought, thank you. And felt, unmistakably, something respond. He woke Ron gently, collected Hermione who seemed genuinely aggrieved at having to leave, and they went back up through the castle with the particular lightness of people who have found something they didn't know was missing. The next morning broke grey and cold, a proper Scottish October morning that came with wind that found every gap in Hogwarts' old windows and made opinions known. Harry woke up feeling the weather before he was properly conscious, not through any window, through the castle itself, which experienced weather in the particular aggrieved way of very old stone that has been doing this for centuries and is still not fully resigned to it. He lay there for a moment and felt the castle wake up around him. The kitchen fires coming on, for floors down and far across the building. The astronomy tower taking the wind. The greenhouses, which had their own microclimate and felt different from the rest, warmer and greener and full of quiet vegetable urgency. The forbidden forest at the edge of his awareness, which he could only feel in the vaguest terms. The castle didn't fully claim the forest, couldn't, and that edge between claimed and unclaimed was interesting in its own right. He thought about Umbridge. He'd been thinking about her since the corridor yesterday, since the look she'd given the ring, not recognition, but discomfort. Like something her instincts were registering that her intellect hadn't caught up to. She was dangerous in the way bureaucratic people with bad intentions are dangerous, not because of power, but because of persistence. She would chip and file and sand until she found a weakness because that was the only method she knew. He needed to take the decision out of her hands before she found one. He dressed and went down to the common room and found, unexpectedly, that Luna Lovegood was there. She was sitting in one of the window alcoves with her feet tucked under her, reading a copy of the Quibbler upside down, wearing what appeared to be a necklace made of dried mushrooms and looking entirely unbothered by the fact that she was in a different house's common room at 7 in the morning. Harry stopped. "Luna. How did you get in here?" She looked up with her characteristic mild surprise. "The portrait asked me a question and I answered it. The fat lady's supposed to ask for the password. She asked me why sad things sometimes make people feel better, and I told her." Luna tilted the Quibbler back to right side up and looked at it critically, then upside down again. She seemed satisfied. "Also she said you're supposed to know that she can feel something different about you and she thinks it's lovely." Harry stared at her. Then he thought about the fat lady's portrait, a portrait, which meant, in the way of Hogwarts portraits, something more than paint and canvas, something of the castle's magic in it. Of course she could feel it. Every sentient thing in the castle could feel it. "Was there something you wanted to talk to me about?" he asked. "No, I was just nearby." She turned a page. "Though I did think you should know that Draco Malfoy went to the Ollery at 3 in the morning and sent 2 letters. The castle knows. I heard it telling the staircases." She said this with the complete matter-of-factness of someone for whom hearing castles talk to staircases was not the strangest thing that would happen before breakfast. Harry sat down across from her. "Luna. How do you hear the castle?" She considered the question seriously, which he appreciated. "I don't think I do, really. I think I hear things that the castle makes happen. Someone opens a door at an unusual time. Something moves that wouldn't move otherwise. The castle communicates in events, not words." She lowered the Quibbler. Her silvery eyes had the quality they always had, that of someone looking at more than one layer of a thing simultaneously. "You can hear it now, can't you? Not just events. The whole thing." "Yes. That must be loud." "It's actually very quiet." He thought about it. "Like white noise but the kind that helps you sleep." She nodded approvingly. "Who did Malfoy write to?" "His father. And someone else whose name I don't know yet." He hadn't been fully aware of this before she'd said it, but feeling back through the night, through the castle's memory of its own movements, he could find the trace of it, the Ollery at 3, 2 owls departing in different directions. "But I can find out. That seems important." "Yes." He looked at her. "Luna, do you want to come to breakfast?" "I haven't been not going to breakfast," she said, as if this were self-evident, and closed the Quibbler. Malfoy's second letter was the one that mattered. Harry worked this out over breakfast, not through surveillance or interception but through a combination of logic and castle sense. He could feel the owlery, the return patterns, the particular weight of letters received. He couldn't read them. But he could feel from where, the direction owls returned from, the rough geography of it. The first return came mid-morning, from the southwest, Wiltshire, the manor. The second arrived just before noon, from a direction that made something cold move through Harry's chest. Not the Ministry's owl routes, which he'd mentally catalogued by now. Something closer. Something in London but not official London. Someone not at the Ministry. Someone who worked adjacent to it. He was in History of Magic when it clicked, Binns droning about goblin rebellions while most of the class achieved varying degrees of consciousness, and when it clicked, he sat up straighter than he had in any class this year. Malfoy had written to someone inside the Ministry who wasn't a Malfoy family contact, wasn't the usual network. Someone who was their own operation. Someone who would want to know the moment a student at Hogwarts was recognized by the castle as a founder heir. He needed to tell Dumbledore. Not because he needed Dumbledore's help, exactly. But because Dumbledore had information about Ministry architecture that Harry didn't, and the time for keeping each other at arm's length was over. The prophecy had reoriented things. The castle had reoriented things. The dynamic between them needed to shift, and Harry was prepared to be the one who shifted it first because he was also prepared to be the one who set the terms. He caught Dumbledore between lunch and afternoon classes, which was not easily done, but the castle told him Dumbledore was in the corridor near his office at 12:45, moving in a direction that would intersect with Harry's path if he turned left at the third-floor landing instead of right. He turned left. Dumbledore saw him coming and stopped. His expression was careful, assessing in the way of someone recalibrating a calculation. "Harry. I need 10 minutes, Harry said. I found something." They went into the office. Harry told him about Malfoy's letters, told him about the direction of the second response, and told him his conclusion. He presented it not as a theory but as an observation, the way Ravenclaw's clarity had shown him to, clear, sequential, logical. Dumbledore listened. When Harry finished, his expression had moved through several things and arrived at something he rarely showed, genuine alertness. Not surprise, Dumbledore was, Harry suspected, constitutionally incapable of genuine surprise, but the sharpened quality of a chess player who has just seen a move they hadn't predicted. "You believe someone inside the Ministry is monitoring for precisely this kind of awakening," Dumbledore said. "I think someone was told it might happen and positioned themselves to respond to it quickly if it did." "And you think Malfoy recognized the ring at breakfast? His family would know the lore. They would have been told what to look for." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "This is very good thinking, Harry." "Don't do that," Harry said, not unkindly. "Don't process what I'm saying through the lens of how capable I'm supposed to be. Just tell me if my conclusion is right." Something shifted in Dumbledore's face. Then, with something that looked like genuine respect, "Your conclusion is right. There are people in the Ministry, not Voldemort's agents, their own faction, who have been aware of the theoretical possibility of a founder inheritance for decades. They have their own plans for what it would mean. Their own intentions for how it should be managed." "Managed," Harry repeated. "Yes. Like you've been managing me." The word landed exactly as he'd intended it to, not as an accusation but as an observation, clear and precise. Dumbledore didn't flinch from it. "Like I have been managing you," he agreed quietly. "Yes. I am not the only one who has made that mistake in your regard. Then we need to be ahead of them." Harry stood. "I found the Founder's chamber." Now Dumbledore went still in a way that was quite different from his usual stillness. "That is not possible," he said slowly. "The chamber's location has been, I know where it is. I've been in it." Harry watched him absorb this. "I'm not telling you its location yet. Not because I don't trust you, mostly, but because I need you to understand that the castle gave it to me, not to the office of headmaster. Its contents are mine by right of what the founders left. I'll share what I find when I find things worth sharing. But it's mine. Silence. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. The portraits, Harry noticed, were all watching very carefully. "All right," Dumbledore said at last, and there was something in his voice that Harry had never quite heard directed at him before. The sound of an equal. "All right, Harry. I'll need you to keep Umbridge off my back while I work. That I may have limited ability to, buy me time," Harry said. "You're good at managing things. Manage her. I'll handle the rest." He left the office without waiting for a response. Behind him he heard Fawkes sing two soft notes that sounded, absurdly, like laughter. Umbridge made her catastrophic mistake at 4 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon. It was the timing that made it catastrophic. 4 o'clock was when Harry had his free period, when students were between classes and moving through corridors, and the corridor outside the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom was therefore not empty when Umbridge came down it with 3 members of the Inquisitorial Squad and the expression of a woman who had decided today was the day. She had a wand in her hand. Drawn, which was new. "Potter," she said, loud enough to carry. Half a dozen students had already slowed to watch. "I'm placing you under educational sanction for possession of an unauthorized magical artifact. Surrender the ring." Harry stopped. He was aware of eyes from every direction, Gryffindors, Hufflepuffs, a few Ravenclaws, even 2 Slytherins who'd come around a corner and paused at the tableau. He was aware of Dean Thomas and Seamus Finnegan 2 steps behind him, frozen. He was aware of Neville Longbottom off to his left, and Neville's hand moving very casually toward his wand pocket in the way of someone who decided something without making a formal announcement about it. He was also aware, through the castle, of the way every portrait in this corridor had straightened. The way the torches nearest to Umbridge had flickered. The way the stone under her feet was, very slightly, different from what it had been 3 seconds ago, not dangerous, not hostile, just distinct, like a place that had made a decision about what it was willing to host. Harry turned to face her fully. "Educational decree number," she began. "No." She blinked. The word had come out completely flat, the refusal of someone who has evaluated a claim and found it insufficient. No heat. No defiance. Just no, the way you say no to something that isn't worth a more elaborate response. "I beg your pardon." "The ring," Harry said clearly, "is a hereditary object. It falls under the Hogwarts Charter's provision for personal property of bloodline significance, Section 12, which predates any educational decree you can issue. You cannot confiscate it. I won't surrender it." He paused. "If you'd like to raise a formal grievance with the school's charter authority, you're welcome to do that." Her color was doing something complicated. Behind her, one of the Inquisitorial Squad, Warrington, had gone slightly uncertain at the edges, the look of someone calculating odds and finding them less comfortable than anticipated. "There is no charter authority operative in the current." "Actually," Harry said, "there is." He held up his right hand. Not threateningly. Just clearly, so the ring was visible to everyone in the corridor. He thought about the castle. He thought about Ius Rectoris and what Hermione had read and what it meant. He felt the ring align with something deep in the foundations of Hogwarts, not a dramatic magic, not lightning or fire, but the quiet certainty of a system responding to its administrator. Every portrait in the corridor woke up simultaneously. Not gradually, not one by one, simultaneously, 30 or 40 frames of painted figures sitting up, turning to look, with the specific attention of people who have been waiting for a particular moment and are now experiencing it. The torches burned gold. Just for a moment, 3 seconds, maybe 4, the corridor was gilded, all the cold grey stone turned amber and warm, and in that light the ring on Harry's finger ran all 4 colors at once in the unhurried way of something that has no reason to be subtle. Then the torches went back to orange and the portrait settled and the corridor was ordinary again. But the students weren't the same. You could see it. That collective intake of breath when something genuinely unexpected happens, when the world shows a seam you didn't know it had. Umbridge's wand hand had lowered slightly. Not by much, by enough. You don't know what you're doing, she said, but her voice had lost its sweetness and beneath the confection there was something less assured. I know exactly what I'm doing, Harry said pleasantly. Have a good afternoon, Professor. He walked past her. Neville fell into step beside him without a word, and then Dean and Seamus, and then a Hufflepuff girl he vaguely recognized from herbology, and then 2 more people he didn't know, and by the time they'd rounded the corner he had 9 people walking in the general direction of wherever Harry was going, none of them quite ready to stop following yet. He glanced at Neville. Did you plan that? Neville asked quietly. The part with the torches? Not exactly. He considered. I thought about it and it happened. I'm still working out the difference between those 2 things. Seemed like a plan to me. It was more like, asking. And being answered. Neville was quiet for a step or 2. Harry. Those students back there are going to talk about this for weeks. I know. The story's going to change 50 times before dinner. By tomorrow it'll be something about you literally commanding the castle to fight Umbridge. Also probably fine. Neville looked at him sidelong. You're not going to tell them to stop. Or, I don't know, keep a low profile, no, Harry said simply. Neville absorbed this. Good, he said, with quiet conviction. I think it's time, actually. The story had indeed changed 17 distinct times by dinner, with variations ranging from the plausible, Harry had faced down Umbridge in the corridor, to the genuinely creative, Harry had turned Umbridge's shoes to snakes while the castle sang. The version that stuck, the one that spread from house to house with the momentum of things that feel true even in their exaggerated form, was that Harry Potter had refused a teacher's direct order, the castle had backed him up, and he hadn't run or hidden or apologized. He sat through dinner with the particular equanimity of someone who has already decided how to feel about a thing before anyone else has started having opinions. Across the hall, Draco Malfoy was very carefully not looking at him. Luna arrived late to the Ravenclaw table with a plate full of food and a small smile and said nothing at all to anyone but somehow conveyed complete awareness of the evening's events through the specific angle of her contentment. Hermione appeared with her notes and 3 further translations and sat next to Harry so close that she was practically beside him in the physical sense and in the dedicated research partnership sense simultaneously. The section I translated tonight, she said under the noise of the hall, describes what they called the Castellan's authority. The ability to regulate magical education within Hogwarts. To set curriculum. To override administrative decisions. She looked at him steadily. Harry, that means Umbridge's educational decrees. All of them. All of them. She has no authority over what the Castellan says happens inside these walls. He thought about the defense against the dark arts class that was actually defense against the dark arts. He thought about students practicing real spells. He thought about the DA, which had been a secret, a risk, a rebellion, becoming simply a lesson. We need the full translation, he said. Give me until the weekend. Ron passed him the bread rolls. Word from Seamus is that Umbridge sent a letter to Fudge this afternoon. Sealed it herself, took it to the Ollery. About me. About the corridor thing. About the, Ron gestured vaguely at Harry's hand. The ring business. He says she looked like she'd eaten something bad. Harry thought about the Ministry faction that Dumbledore had confirmed existed. He thought about Malfoy's second letter going south-southwest, not quite Ministry direction. He thought about timing and acceleration and what it means when you make a move in the open and the people watching you have to decide whether to respond. Good, he said quietly. Good that the Ministry's getting involved. Good that they're having to respond to me, instead of the other way around. Ron thought about this while chewing toast. I keep thinking of it like chess, he said finally. You've just come out with a piece they didn't expect and now they have to recalculate the whole board. That's a good way to think about it. I have moments. He grinned. Also, for what it's worth, literally everyone in Hufflepuff thinks you're brilliant after the corridor thing. Neville says 2 Slytherins told him quietly that they thought it was impressive. Quietly, you know. Very quietly. Give it time, Harry said. He looked around the hall, the 4 tables, the 4 houses, the stone walls that were his now in a way no one had quite processed yet, not even him. The enchanted ceiling showed cloud-covered stars, the autumn sky pressing down on old stone and lamplit glass. Somewhere below, in a room that had waited 1,000 years, 4 chairs sat around a table with 4 objects on it and walls ridden floor to ceiling with everything that had been left for this moment. He had a lot of work to do. He couldn't wait to start. Chapter 3, The Blood Doesn't Lie. The owl arrived during breakfast on Saturday. Not a ministry owl, Harry could tell the difference now, had catalogued them the way a birder catalogues species, by wing-beat pattern and the particular authority of their descent. Ministry owls arrived with a kind of administrative inevitability, like tax correspondence. This one was different. It was a large, pale bird with yellow eyes that found Harry across the great hall with the focused specificity of something that had been given very precise instructions, and it dropped a letter on his plate with the efficiency of a courier who had other deliveries and no interest in sentiment. The seal was green wax. No crest. Just a pressed ring mark, circular, with a serpent that was eating its own tail. Ron leaned over to look. That's not the ministry. No. Harry broke the seal. The letter inside was short, written in a precise hand that suggested someone who had thought carefully about every word before committing it to parchment. Mr. Potter, the Council of Hereditary Magical Families is aware of the events of the past week. We represent interests that are neither aligned with the ministry under Fudge nor with the movement of the Dark Lord, but which have strong opinions regarding the governance of Hogwarts and the management of founder inheritance claims. We would appreciate a conversation at your earliest convenience. What you carry is not simply personal. It has implications for the entire structure of Wizarding Britain. It would be in your interest to understand those implications before others with less good will explain them to you. We can arrange a meeting on neutral ground. Regards, M. Selwyn. Harry read it twice and handed it to Hermione. She read it, handed it to Ron. Ron read it with his eyebrows progressively ascending toward his hairline. Council of Hereditary Magical Families, Hermione said. I've read about them. They're old money, old blood, going back centuries. They're not Death Eaters, but they're the people who think they should be running things and have spent 500 years being quietly furious that they aren't. And now they want a conversation, Harry said. They want to manage you, Ron said. Same as everyone else. I know. Harry took the letter back and read Selwyn's last line again. We can arrange a meeting on neutral ground. He thought about this, the phrasing was careful, diplomatic, suggesting someone who was accustomed to negotiating but was also genuinely uncertain of what they were dealing with. Good. Uncertainty was useful. I'll write back, he said. Hermione looked at him sharply. Harry, I'll write back and tell them I'll consider it. He folded the letter. I'm not going to their neutral ground. They can come to mine. She absorbed this. You mean Hogwarts? The castle is the only ground I need. Across the hall, Draco Malfoy was watching the pale owl depart with an expression that had cycled rapidly through several emotions and settled on something that looked remarkably like concern. Not for Harry, for himself, Harry thought. Whatever second letter Malfoy had sent earlier in the week, whoever he'd contacted, the response had either come back unfavorable or hadn't come at all, and Malfoy was doing the arithmetic on a situation that was moving faster than he'd expected. Harry met his eyes across the hall. Malfoy looked away, and then, with what appeared to be a deliberate effort, looked back. He gave a very small nod. Barely perceptible. The kind of acknowledgement that cost something. Harry returned it. Equally small, equally deliberate. Ron had missed this. Hermione hadn't. She looked between them with the expression of someone who wants to ask a question and has correctly identified that the middle of the Great Hall is not the right location for it. Later, in the corridor, she asked. "What was that with Malfoy?" "I'm not sure yet," Harry said. "But I think his second letter went to the council and the reply told him something he wasn't expecting to hear." "What, that you're legitimate? That I'm more than they thought? And that whoever they were planning to side with, it might not be the straightforward choice they assumed?" He turned toward the staircase. "Come on. You said you'd have the Castellan translation done by the weekend." "I said I needed until the weekend, that's not the same as," she fell into step behind him with the resigned energy of someone who had already, at some level, finished the translation. "Fine. It's done. Come and see." The translation was 8 feet of parchment pinned above Hermione's usual library table with a care that bordered on reverence. She'd color-coded it, of course she had, with notations in the margins and cross-references to 3 separate historical texts. Harry read through it standing, because sitting down felt like it would take longer and the parts of his mind connected to the castle were humming with mild impatience. The Castellan's authority was broader than Dumbledore had implied, and Hermione's expression suggested she'd been quietly staggered by this since completing the translation and had been processing it for approximately 48 hours in order to arrive at composed. The Castellan, the recognized heir, recognized by the castle's own enchantments, held authority over the physical fabric of Hogwarts. Not just access. Architecture. They could open or seal any part of the castle. They could determine what magic was and wasn't permitted within the walls, not the ambient magic of the students, but structured, authorized magic. Any educational decree, administrative order, or governmental directive that pertained to Hogwarts required, by the original charter, the Castellan's countersignature to have legal force within the school's boundaries. Which meant that every educational decree Umbridge had plastered across the walls of Hogwarts for the past month was, strictly speaking, not in effect. Not because Harry had revoked them. Because they had never been properly authorized in the first place. The ministry had issued them under the assumption that Hogwarts operated within the ministry's governance framework exclusively. The castle's charter predated the ministry by 800 years and had never been formally superseded, only forgotten. Bureaucracies forget things that become inconvenient to remember. "She has no power here," Harry said. Not triumphantly. As a plain fact. Technically, as a teacher, she has standard educational authority. The classroom stuff, marks, detentions in the conventional sense. But the decrees, Hermione tapped the relevant section. Each one requires this. She pointed to the Castellan's countersignature line. It's built into the text. Every single one of them. And none of them have it. None of them have it. Harry straightened. He looked at the 8 feet of parchment and then at Hermione. How long has she been operating under invalid authority? Since the first decree. Hermione paused. Which means the DA was never actually illegal. We weren't violating a legitimate decree. We were violating a piece of paper that the castle never accepted. Ron, who had been reading over Harry's shoulder, made a sound. We got put in detention and lost 50 points and spent all those nights in the room of requirement, yes, Hermione said, with barely contained feeling. Because of a piece of paper the castle thought was rubbish. Essentially. Harry looked at the ring. He thought about Umbridge's detentions, about the quill that wrote in his own blood, about every session of I must not tell lies carved into his skin. He felt something run through him that wasn't quite anger. Anger was too hot and imprecise for what this was. It was colder than anger, and more structural, and it arrived at a conclusion with the efficiency of someone who has been patient long enough and has decided that patience has served its purpose. I need a quill, he said. Hermione produced one immediately, which confirmed she'd known this moment was coming. Harry sat down, pulled a fresh piece of parchment toward him, and wrote with the careful precision of someone who wants every word to be correct the first time. It wasn't a long document. It was 12 lines. It cited the relevant charter sections, he'd memorized them reading the translation, and it formally invoked the Castellan's authority to declare all existing educational decrees at Hogwarts null and without effect until reviewed and countersigned by the recognized founder heir. It wasn't an attack on Umbridge. It was an administrative correction. The tone was measured, precise, almost bureaucratic. He signed it with his name and then, deliberately, pressed the ring to the page. The impression it left wasn't ink. It was an embossing, raised and clear, showing 4 interlocking symbols that corresponded to each founder. The parchment seemed to recognize the seal, it went slightly warm under his hand and the ink of his writing deepened to a color that was neither black nor brown but something in between that looked permanent in a way ordinary ink didn't. He rolled it, sealed it, and handed it to Hermione. "Make a copy for Dumbledore," he said. "I'll take the original to Umbridge." Hermione held it with both hands like something that might react to being dropped. "You're going to deliver it yourself?" "Yes." "Harry," she put a quill through my hand, he said. "I'll deliver it myself." Dolores Umbridge's office was an act of aggression dressed as interior decoration. She'd covered every surface with moving plates of kittens, not in a way that suggested fondness for cats, but in the way of someone trying to construct a persona from scratch, picking up softness like a costume. The whole place smelled of cloying floral tea and something underneath it that might have been old paper or old authority, the smell of someone who has spent a career in rooms where power was dispensed by document. She was behind her desk when Harry knocked and entered without waiting for an answer. He looked around the room with the casual interest of a property owner surveying a rental, and something about that particular quality of attention made her spine straighten before she'd consciously registered what she was reacting to. "Potter," she said, in her sweetest voice. "What a surprise." "Sit, no thank you." He crossed to the desk and set the document down in front of her. He didn't explain it. He let her pick it up. He watched her face while she read. The sweetness went first, replaced by the careful blankness of a bureaucrat reading something that is rearranging their understanding of their own position. Her eyes moved across the parchment twice. She looked at the seal. She looked at it for a long moment. This isn't legal," she said finally, and her voice had lost all its honey, not because she was angry yet, but because she was working out how to be angry while being correct. "This is a student purporting to invoke an 8th century charter provision that has no operative legal, check it," Harry said. "Against the ministry's legal archive. The Hogwarts founding charter is filed there. It was never superseded. Section 12, subsection 4. He'd asked Hermione to verify this specifically. The provision is valid. The requirement for Castellan countersignature is explicit. The ministry is the governing authority of, the ministry was founded in 1707, Harry said. Hogwarts was founded in 993. When 2 governance frameworks conflict, the one with the longer operative history has precedence in common wizarding law. You can have your legal department verify that too." He paused. "I expect you have a good legal department." "Bureaucracies usually do." She looked at him with an expression he'd never seen from her, not the simpering sweetness, not the vicious cold she showed students in detention. Something more genuine than either. She looked at him the way people look at things they don't know how to categorize. "Who helped you with this?" she said. "Hermione Granger wrote the citations," he said honestly. "The authority is mine." He let a beat pass. "The decrees you've issued are administratively void within these walls. That's not an argument. It's a fact of charter law. I'd recommend getting legal advice before issuing any further orders pertaining to Hogwarts, because the castle itself will not recognize them." He turned to leave. "Potter." Her voice was careful now in a way that was different from its usual careful, less calculated, more considered. "You understand that what you're doing will attract attention. Significant attention. People who are considerably more dangerous than me." He stopped. Turned back. Looked at her with the calm of someone who has already thought about this. "I know," he said. "I'm counting on it." He left. In the corridor outside, He breathed in the cold stone air of the castle and felt the building resonate quietly around him, the deep satisfaction of old architecture that has had its rights correctly acknowledged. The social architecture of Hogwarts shifted over the following 3 days in ways that were visible if you knew where to look. The first thing Harry noticed was the Inquisitorial Squad. Specifically, 2 of its members stopped wearing their badges on Monday morning. Not making any announcement. Simply, not wearing them. He felt their absence the way you feel when a noise that's been going on for a while suddenly stops. By Tuesday, 4 more had quietly put theirs in pockets or drawers. Pansy Parkinson kept hers, which told him something about Pansy Parkinson. The second thing was that students who had been shut out of the DA, who hadn't been invited or hadn't known, who'd heard the whispers but been afraid, started appearing near Harry in hallways with the specific hovering quality of people who want to ask something and haven't quite worked out how. He let this develop at its own pace. Forced membership wasn't the point. The point was that the door was open. The third thing was the staff. Professor Sprout left him a pot of something from the greenhouses on Thursday morning, a plant he didn't recognize, purplish-black, with leaves that turned toward him when he entered the room. No note. Just the plant, with the particular expressiveness of someone who can't say what they mean in front of colleagues but finds other ways. Professor Flitwick made brief eye contact in the corridor and gave him one firm, small nod. McGonagall stopped him after Transfiguration. Not dramatically, she simply waited until the rest of the class filed out and said, very quietly, "The document you submitted to Professor Umbridge has been verified by 3 separate legal scholars in the last 48 hours, at my request. The charter provision is exactly as valid as you claimed." "I know," Harry said. "The Ministry will respond," she said. "I know that too." She looked at him for a moment, the sharp, thorough Minerva McGonagall look that had always felt like being read rather than seen. "Good," she said finally, with the clipped directness of someone who has been wanting to say it for a while. "I'll let you know if I hear anything." She turned back to her desk and Harry understood he was dismissed, and also that she was now, quietly and firmly, in his corner. The move against him came on Wednesday afternoon and it came from a direction nobody expected. Harry was in the courtyard with Neville. They'd fallen into an easy habit of walking between afternoon classes together, partly because Neville had started developing what Harry suspected was going to become an exceptional tactical intelligence, the kind that grew in people who'd spent years learning to assess threats quietly, when the 3 men came through the main gates. Not students. Not teachers. Adults, in ministry robes, with the specific bearing of people who have arrived with paperwork and the authority to act on it. 2 of them Harry didn't recognize. The third was a man he knew from newspaper photographs, Dawlish, an Auror. Dawlish had heavy shoulders and the manner of a man accustomed to being the most formidable person in a room. He moved through the courtyard with the authority of someone who's been told this will be straightforward and hasn't yet encountered evidence to the contrary. Harry watched them come and didn't move. "Harry Potter?" Dawlish said, stopping in front of him. "Yes. I have a summons for your attendance at the Ministry of Magic for a preliminary hearing regarding unauthorized use of a restricted magical artifact." He produced a document. "The artifact in question being a ring of hereditary significance currently in your possession, the acquisition of which has not been declared to the appropriate, the ring wasn't acquired," Harry said. "It manifested. Through the castle's own enchantments. You can verify that with the Hogwarts founding charter, which the Ministry has on file." He glanced at the summons without taking it. "Also, your summons is void." Dawlish blinked. "I beg your pardon. You're on Hogwarts grounds. Any ministry directive requiring student attendance off school property requires the countersignature of the school's administrative authority, which in this case means 2 things, the headmaster and, per charter, the castellan." He looked at Dawlish steadily. "Neither signature appears on that document. So it's void." A pause. Dawlish looked at the summons. Looked at his 2 companions. One of them was already leafing through a folder with the expression of someone who had been told this would be simple and is now finding the footnotes. "We have the authority to," the second man began. On the grounds, Harry said, of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, you have the authority that the school's charter grants you. Which does not include compelling a student off school grounds without proper authorization. He looked at Dawlish. I'd suggest returning to the ministry and having your legal department look at the charter. He paused. Everyone's been having their legal department look at the charter this week. It's been very productive. Neville, slightly behind Harry's right shoulder, was maintaining an expression of absolute neutrality that Harry was fairly sure was costing him significant effort. Dawlish looked at Harry for a long moment. He was a professional, which meant he was calculating rather than reacting. Harry could see him arrive at the conclusion that forcing the issue here, on school grounds, with students watching from every surrounding window, because every window in the visible courtyard now had students in it, was not the situation his orders had anticipated. We'll be in contact, Dawlish said, with the precision of a man closing a door rather than slamming it. I'll look forward to it, Harry said. The three ministry men walked back through the gates with the dignity of a strategic retreat, which is a different thing from a rout but arrives at the same place. Harry turned to Neville. Still not afraid of anyone, Neville observed. Still not afraid of anyone, Harry confirmed. The Slytherin common room that evening was having what Harry could feel, through the castle's awareness, was a significant internal debate. He couldn't hear words, the castle gave him geography and emotional temperature, not eavesdropping, but he could feel the shape of it. Something was being argued. Something was being decided. And at around 9 o'clock, the result of that argument walked across the entrance hall and up the main staircase and found Harry in the corridor near the library where, thanks to the castle, he'd known they were heading for approximately 10 minutes. Draco Malfoy was alone. No Crabbe. No Goyle. That, by itself, was significant. He stopped in front of Harry. His expression had none of its usual performance, the practiced contempt, the studied ease of someone born believing the world was arranged for his convenience. What was underneath was younger and less certain and considerably more interesting. I need to talk to you, he said. I know, Harry said. Come on. He led them to an alcove off the main corridor, one of those Hogwarts spaces that existed in the castle's abundant spatial generosity, and sat on the window ledge. Malfoy stood. He crossed his arms, uncrossed them, crossed them again, and then stopped doing things with his arms entirely. The letter I sent, he began. To the Council of Hereditary Families. Malfoy's jaw tightened at the confirmation. You know. I know which direction the response came from. A pause. Malfoy looked at him with the recalibrating quality Harry had seen across the Great Hall. They told my father, he said, that the convergence, if it was real, would be the most significant political development in Wizarding Britain in 3 centuries. They also told him that anyone who actively worked against the recognized heir would find themselves, he stopped. Started again. There are old laws, Potter. Older than the ministry. Old enough that the council still takes them seriously even if nobody else does. The Castellan's right to sanction families who actively work against. I'm not going to sanction your family, Malfoy. The directness of it seemed to briefly take the wind out of whatever speech he'd been preparing. I'm aware. That's not, he exhaled. My father is in a complicated position. He has obligations to the Dark Lord that are not, he can't simply, he looked out the window, at the dark grounds, and for a moment he just looked his age. 16, with too much inheritance and too many people claiming his loyalty. I'm not asking you for anything. I'm telling you that I'm not going to actively work against you. That's as much as I can give right now. Harry looked at him for a moment. How much of what you've done this year, the inquisitorial squad, reporting students, how much of that was you and how much was because Umbridge made it worth your while? Malfoy was quiet. The squad, Harry said. Most of those students dropped their badges this week without you telling them to. You didn't stop them. No. Why not? Another silence. Because I don't believe in what she's doing, Malfoy said, with the particular flatness of someone stating something they've decided to stop arguing with themselves about. She's a ministry toady with cruelty as a hobby and no actual philosophy. That's not, he stopped. My family has views I don't entirely share. But their views, at least. Umbridge is just small. It was, Harry thought, more honesty than he'd ever gotten from Draco Malfoy in 5 years. He didn't trust it completely. He didn't have to. All right, he said. Malfoy blinked. All right. You've told me where you stand. I've told you where I stand. We can work with that. He stood up. I'm not your enemy, Malfoy. I never was, actually. You were mine for a while, which I understand. But that's done now. Malfoy looked at him with the expression of someone who has brought an umbrella to what turned out to be a perfectly clear day, uncertain whether to feel relieved or wrong-footed. You're strange, he said finally. Yeah, Harry agreed. Come and find me if anything changes. Anything about your father, the Dark Lord, the Council, anything. He paused. And I'll do the same. Malfoy nodded. Once, stiff, with the difficulty of someone performing an unfamiliar gesture. Then he walked back down the corridor toward the Slytherin dungeons, and Harry watched him go and thought about chess, about pieces that were neither yours nor your opponent's, positioned at the edges of the board, waiting to see which way the game went. He'd just made one less enemy. That was enough for tonight. The assassin arrived on Friday. Not dramatically, that was the thing about it. There was no crack of apparition, no sudden darkness, no theatrical reveal. Harry felt it through the castle at 3 in the morning, a wrongness in the fabric of the building that his sleeping mind registered before his conscious one, a presence in the castle that the castle itself didn't recognize. Not a student. Not a teacher. Not a ghost. Something that had gotten through the wards by means the castle found, and this was the only word for the sensation, offensive. Like a lock had been picked in a way that left damage. He was awake and out of bed before he'd made a decision about it. He pulled his wand from the nightstand and stood in the middle of his dormitory in the dark and let the castle tell him where. 5th floor. Moving toward the Gryffindor tower. Moving with purpose. He felt for what it was, a person, yes, a wizard, moving with the specific economy of someone trained for exactly this, not running but moving efficiently, covering distance without waste, and carrying something on them that registered to the castle's magic the way a splinter registers to skin, foreign, irritating, specific. Dark object. Probably a portkey. Probably keyed to leave the school grounds. The plan was to get to him, establish physical contact via the portkey, and take him somewhere controlled. Clean. Deniable. Harry dressed in 15 seconds. He woke Ron with a hand on his shoulder and 2 words. Ron was up without complaint or confusion, which was one of the things Harry would always appreciate about Ron Weasley. He didn't stop to think about whether he was scared because the situation didn't have room for it. He didn't go toward the assassin. He went around. The castle let him. The staircase that should have been between him and the faster route simply wasn't. Not dramatically. It had rotated in the way Hogwarts staircases occasionally did, except this one rotated to Harry's benefit with the specific convenience of a building that had decided which side it was on. He came out on the 5th floor from the east end and the assassin was coming from the west and Harry was already there, waiting, standing in the corridor with his wand in his hand and the torches burning steady and gold on either side, when the man came around the corner. The assassin stopped. He was good. Harry gave him that. His face registered surprise for approximately a quarter of a second and then went professional again, hand moving toward his wand with practiced speed, and Harry said, very clearly, Expelliarmus, and meant it with everything the castle was putting through him, the full weight of Hogwarts behind a single word. The disarming charm hit like a wall. The man's wand didn't just fly out of his hand, he went backward with it, hit the corridor wall with a sound that echoed once, and slid down it, and his wand was in Harry's left hand before the sound finished echoing. Harry looked at him. The man looked at Harry. He was in his 30s, dark-robed, no identifying insignia. His face was professional and tired in the way of people who have spent a long time doing things they've stopped thinking about. He looked at Harry, the ring on Harry's finger, the lit torches, the complete absence of fear in Harry's expression, and something in his own expression made a calculation. "Who sent you?" Harry said. Silence. "I know it wasn't Voldemort," Harry said. "This isn't his method and this isn't his level of subtlety." He thought about the Pale Owl. The Council of Hereditary Families. Selwyn. Was it Selwyn? A small tension in the man's jaw. Not confirmation. Not denial. Enough. "I'm going to ask you to do two things," Harry said. "First, tell me how you got through the wards. Second, answer some questions about who you work for." "And if I don't?" Harry looked at him calmly. He thought about what he had, the castle, the charter, for lines of founder magic in his blood, and the specific quality of complete composure that comes from knowing exactly where you stand on your own ground. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "I'm going to hold you here, the castle will see to that, and I think you can feel that it's already started, and I'm going to send for people who will ask the questions more formally." A pause. "Or you can answer me now and I'll send you back without involving the ministry. Your choice. You have about 30 seconds before this corridor starts getting colder and the walls start making cooperation feel considerably more attractive." The walls did, in fact, begin to get colder. Harry hadn't planned it exactly. He'd thought about it, and the castle had agreed. The man looked at the stones around him, feeling the deliberate drop in temperature with the professional alarm of someone who understands structural magic and has just understood the full scale of what he's trespassing in. "They wanted to know the limits," the man said finally. "What you could actually do. Information. That's all this was." "And the portkey?" A flicker. "Backup. In case you were actually as capable as the report said." "And am I?" The man looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," he said, with the flat honesty of a professional giving an accurate assessment. "You are." Harry kept him in the corridor. The castle maintained a subtle pressure, nothing painful, just insistently inconvenient for movement, and went 3 steps away and sent his Patronus with a message for Dumbledore. The silver stag lit the corridor, bright and certain, and Harry watched it go, and behind him heard the man make a small involuntary sound at the sight of it. Harry turned back. "The Patronus bother you?" "It's very bright," the man said, which wasn't really the point but was apparently the only part he'd decided to address. "It's a stag," Harry said. "My father's form." Another silence. The man looked at the ring. The ring sat on Harry's hand with the utter indifference of something that doesn't need to prove itself. "You're not what anyone expected," the man said. "No," Harry agreed. "I'm what was needed instead." Dumbledore arrived 7 minutes later with McGonagall and the specific look of a man who had been awake anyway. He took in the scene, the wandless man sitting against the corridor wall, Harry standing 3 feet away with 2 wands and an expression of absolute equanimity, and his eyes moved to Harry with that quality of reassessment that Harry was becoming accustomed to. "Are you all right?" Dumbledore asked. "Fine." He held out the man's wand. He came through the eastern exterior ward at the point where the old Muggle-repelling charm interfaces with the Fidelius boundary. There's a gap there that shouldn't be possible to exploit but apparently was. "You'll want to fix it." Dumbledore took the wand. "Yes," he said. "We will." He looked at the man on the floor. Then at Harry. "How did you know he was here?" "The castle told me." McGonagall made a small sound that was either disbelief or vindication, which with McGonagall were often acoustically similar. Dumbledore crouched beside the man and began a quiet, careful examination. Harry stepped back and leaned against the opposite wall and looked down the corridor in both directions, gold-lit, stone-warm, entirely his, and thought about Selwyn's letter, still unanswered in his desk. He'd been considering what to write back. He'd decided, in the last 20 minutes, that the answer was fairly simple. He wasn't going to go to their neutral ground. But they were going to have a conversation, because the conversation they needed to have was this, that the structure they'd been working within for centuries, the one where old families managed founder claims and ancient rights and the governance of Hogwarts from comfortable distances, had just changed. Permanently. And the conversation wasn't going to be about what Harry was willing to give them. It was going to be about what they were willing to accept. Because the blood didn't lie. The castle didn't lie. And Harry Potter, standing in a lit corridor at 3 a.m. with 2 wands and a ring that carried 4 legacies, was not a negotiating position. He was a fact. He went back to bed just before 4. He slept well, again, deeply and without dreams, which was becoming a reliable feature of his life now in a way it had never been before. The castle held him with the ease of something that has always held this particular weight and found it, at last, exactly right. Chapter 4, Old Wounds. The Founder's Chamber had a different quality in the morning. Harry had only been in it at night before, and there was something about bringing daylight hours to it, even though no actual daylight reached this far below the lake, that made it feel more workable. Less like a discovery and more like a room he was learning to use. The pale glow of the walls was the same constant, patient luminescence, but Harry's relationship to it had changed. 3 visits in and he was starting to read the room the way you read a space you've committed to understanding. He came alone this time. That was a deliberate choice. Hermione would have arguments about it that were not entirely wrong, which was precisely why he hadn't told her he was coming. What he needed to do this morning required a kind of quiet that other people, even Hermione, even Ron, would alter simply by being present. He sat in Gryffindor's chair. He looked at the 4 objects on the table. And then he looked at the walls, at the dense text spiraling floor to ceiling in 4 distinct hands, and he focused on the section Hermione had flagged 2 days ago as anomalous, a passage she'd been unable to translate cleanly, not because of the language but because, she'd said, the grammar implied a conditional structure she couldn't fully resolve. It reads like instructions for something that can only be completed by the person it's written for, she'd said, which he'd been thinking about ever since. He got up and stood in front of that section. It was written in all 4 scripts simultaneously, layered, each line of one overlapping with another so that if you looked at it straight on it resolved into something close to illegible. But if he tilted his perception, leaned into the castle sense, let the ring do what it apparently did when he stopped second-guessing it, the 4 layers separated into 4 distinct meanings that arrived in his mind simultaneously the way chords arrive, individual notes that are also a single thing. When the heir sits in knowledge of all 4 lines, the memories will answer. Speak to any object and your intention will open what is kept there. These are not records. They are selves. We left what we were, not what we thought. Understand the difference. Harry read it twice. We left what we were, not what we thought. He went back to the table. He stood in front of Slytherin's locket. He'd already touched it, already received the note inside, but that had been involuntary, the locket had opened to him before he'd decided anything. This was different. He was making a choice. He picked it up and held it in both hands and said, clearly, to no one and everyone, show me what you left. The room didn't change. The locket did. Not physically. But in his mind, behind his eyes, in the place where the castle usually spoke to him in geography and temperature, something opened. And Harry experienced, not as a memory he was watching but as a memory he was in, the last day Salazar Slytherin spent at Hogwarts. It was autumn in the memory, the same cutting October that was happening above the lake right now, and Slytherin was standing in what Harry recognized as the entrance hall, except it was different, the stone newer, the ceiling lower, the 4 house banners not yet hung. The castle was younger here. It felt different in Harry's bones, the same building but not yet fully itself, still becoming. Slytherin was arguing with Gryffindor. Harry had expected that. What he hadn't expected was that Gryffindor was the one arguing from a position of fear. You want to teach any child who comes through that door, Slytherin was saying, and his voice had none of the cold menace that history had assigned it. He sounded exhausted. He sounded like someone who had been having the same argument for months and could feel the ground shifting under it. Godric. Godric, listen to me. There are Muggleborns who carry extraordinary power. I'm not disputing that. But the Muggles outside are burning things. Do you understand what I'm telling you? They are burning people. And if we bring their children inside these walls without caution, without some way to understand who we are dealing with, we risk everything we've built. You're afraid, Gryffindor said. Not unkindly. That was what struck Harry. You've always been afraid under the courage. I've known you for 30 years, Sal. This isn't about Muggleborns. This is about what happened to your family. Slytherin's face, and Harry could see it clearly, angular and precise, older than he'd imagined, with dark eyes that were currently doing something complicated, went very still. That has nothing to do with this. It has everything to do with this. The silence between them had 30 years in it. I cannot stay, Slytherin said finally, and the exhaustion in it was total. Not rage. Not dramatic exit. The flat defeat of someone who has tried every other option. If I stay, I will make this worse. I know my own mind well enough for that much. I will compromise what we've built by, he stopped. By becoming the thing I'm afraid of becoming. Gryffindor looked at him. Then leave the best of yourself here. Don't take it with you. And Slytherin had turned and looked at the walls of the entrance hall, younger walls, not yet full of portraits, not yet layered with 1,000 years of habitation, and Harry felt, through the memory, what Slytherin felt in that moment, that this building was the best thing he'd ever helped make, and he was leaving it because he wasn't good enough to stay. The memory ended. Harry came back to himself in the chamber with the locket warm in his hands and his eyes stinging in a way he was going to attribute to the general dimness of the room and not to anything else. He stood there for a moment and breathed. He'd been 11 years old when he was sorted and the hat considered Slytherin for him, and he'd said not Slytherin, and the hat had listened. He'd been 12 when he'd faced the basilisk in the Chamber of Secrets, in a room Slytherin had built with fear and sealed with shame, and he'd thought of Slytherin as the architect of everything that had tried to kill him. He'd carried that for 5 years. And now he was standing in a room Slytherin had built with love, holding an object Slytherin had left for someone he'd hoped would come, and the story was more complicated than he'd let himself consider. Voldemort had claimed this legacy. Had built his entire identity around it, the last heir of Slytherin, the Parselmouth, the pure-blood ideology taken to its murderous conclusion. But Voldemort hadn't understood what he'd inherited. He'd taken the fear and left the grief behind. He'd found the locked chamber and used it as a place to hide things, never understanding that it had been built as a place to leave things. Harry set the locket down. He picked up Ravenclaw's diadem. He'd been more careful about this one. The walls had been explicit about sequencing and he'd been honoring that, taking each object in order, not rushing. But he'd been in the chamber 4 times now and he felt the room differently than he had at the start, and when he held the diadem the clarity of Ravenclaw's magic moved through him like cold water, sharp and organizing, and he knew it was time. He put it on. The world didn't change dramatically. There was no flash of light, no sudden access to cosmic understanding. It was more like, the thinking he was already doing becoming faster and more connected, the threads between ideas shortening, the gap between I wonder and I see collapsing. He was still himself. But a more efficient version of himself, the one he became in the middle of a crisis when he didn't have time to second-guess. The walls of the chamber became clear in a way they hadn't before. He could read all 4 scripts simultaneously without effort, and the conditional structure Hermione had struggled with resolved immediately, not because she'd been wrong but because the grammar was genuinely only completable by the person wearing the diadem, like a sentence that requires you to be standing in a specific spot to hear its last word. He read for 20 minutes without stopping. When he took the diadem off, he sat down in Gryffindor's chair and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Because he now knew where the remaining Horcruxes were. Not all of them, the magic was old and the information partial, but two of them, with high certainty. One was in this castle. Had been in this castle the entire time. The other was at the Ministry of Magic, in a room that Harry knew from his dreams, that he visited against his will on bad nights, that had a door he'd been trying to reach for most of this year. The Department of Mysteries. The castle Horcrux first. He needed to deal with it before anything else, before the ministry came back with better paperwork, before the Council of Hereditary Families decided to try a different approach than a single discreet assassin, before Voldemort noticed that the connection he'd had to Harry's mind had gone quiet and started wondering why. He needed help with this part. He needed Hermione. He also, he realized, needed to deal with Snape. He found Snape in the potions classroom at the end of the school day, which was where Snape was most days in the late afternoon, not teaching, just there. It was his room in the way that rooms belong to people who've spent years filling them with their particular intensity. The smell of ingredients and old cauldron smoke. The particular cold of dungeon stone. Snape looked up when Harry entered and his expression went through its usual sequence, watchfulness, the suppressed contempt, and then, now, something new that had appeared since the night in the corridor with the assassin. Something calibrating. "Potter," he said. "I don't recall scheduling a session." "You didn't." Harry closed the classroom door behind him. "I have some things to tell you and a question to ask. I'd rather do it here than anywhere else because I don't want this overheard." Snape set down the ingredient he'd been preparing, something gray and fibrous that Harry didn't identify. He folded his arms with the studied ease of someone controlling whether or not they look interested. "Then speak." "The Occlumency sessions are finished," Harry said. "Not because I'm refusing them but because I don't need them in the same way anymore. The castles replaced the vulnerable points." He watched Snape absorb this without visible reaction. "You already knew that was a possibility. Dumbledore told you about the ring. He mentioned it. How much did he tell you?" A pause. "Sufficient. Did he tell you that your sessions were making the vulnerability worse?" The quality of Snape's stillness changed. Not guilt, Snape didn't perform guilt the way most people did, wouldn't give it that name. But something adjacent to it, a rigidity in the stillness that acknowledged the question without answering it directly. "The headmaster asked me to be thorough," Snape said. "I know." Harry sat down on one of the student desks, which he could tell bothered Snape, who clearly felt that uninvited sitting was a significant liberty. He sat there anyway. "I'm not here about that. I don't want an apology and I'm not interested in relitigating it." He looked at Snape steadily. "I'm here because I need to know something, and I think you're the only person whose answer I'll actually trust." Something shifted in Snape's expression. Barely perceptible. The fractional adjustment of someone who has spent years being positioned as one thing by everyone around them, and has just heard a description of themselves that doesn't fit the usual category. "What do you want to know?" Snape said. "The night Voldemort killed my parents," Harry said. "Were you there?" The silence was long and particular. Snape didn't answer immediately, which told Harry more than a quick answer would have. He walked to his desk with the deliberate economy of movement that was his version of composure and stood behind it. "No," Snape said. "I was not there. But you knew it was going to happen." Another silence. "I knew he had targeted your family. And you told Dumbledore." "Yes. But it wasn't enough. Because Voldemort already knew about the secret keeper and he'd already gotten to Pettigrew." Harry kept his voice level. He'd thought about this for a long time, turned it over through the Ravenclaw clarity of this morning, and had arrived at something that wasn't forgiveness yet but was at least full understanding, which was a necessary prerequisite. You couldn't have stopped it. Even if you'd gotten the information to Dumbledore an hour earlier, Pettigrew had already made his choice. Snape was very still. "I'm telling you that because I want you to know I understand the actual timeline," Harry said. "Not to make you feel better. To establish that I know the truth of it." He paused. "Why did you tell Dumbledore in the first place?" "You were his spy. That was your role. But telling him about my family specifically, that was something else. The silence stretched for so long that Harry thought Snape wasn't going to answer. Then, your mother was the finest witch I have ever known, Snape said, very quietly and very precisely, and I owed her a debt I could not repay in time. Harry looked at him. Snape's face was, for once, completely unguarded, not because he'd chosen to show himself but because he'd been caught in the truth of it before he could decide not to. His eyes had gone somewhere internal, somewhere 16 years back, and Harry had the sudden vivid knowledge of what the memory looked like from the inside. He'd been on the other end of enough Snape memories to recognize the quality of his grief. She chose my father, Harry said. Not unkindly. She chose the better man, Snape said, with a flatness that had stopped arguing with the fact a long time ago. And you've been, Harry stopped himself. This wasn't the time for that particular excavation, and Snape wouldn't thank him for it. I need to know something else. About the castle. About the room of requirement specifically. The pivot was jarring and deliberate. Snape blinked, came back to the present. What about it? Has anyone used it for storage this year? Long term. Something left there that they didn't want found. Snape's eyes sharpened. He was brilliant, Harry had always known that, and the sharpness when he engaged with an actual problem was visible in the way his intelligence moved. You believe something is hidden there. I know something is hidden there. I need to know who had access that I might not know about. Dumbledore has used it on occasion. I used it briefly in September for additional ingredient storage. He paused. And Draco Malfoy has been spending significant time in it since October. Harry absorbed this. He hadn't expected it to be Malfoy, had half expected it to be a historical placement, something from decades ago. But a student using the room of requirement for extended private sessions, and Malfoy specifically, meant something was being worked on. Something that required privacy and significant time in a room that became whatever you needed it to be. Thank you, Harry said. He stood. Potter. Snape's voice stopped him at the door. He turned. Snape was looking at him with an expression that was deeply unfamiliar, not warmth, not exactly, but something that was trying to find its way towards something like honesty. What you are doing. What the castle has made you. He paused. Lily would have, he stopped. Restarted. Be careful, he said instead, which was not what he'd been going to say but was the version of it he could give. There are people in positions of power who will not hesitate to move against someone who threatens their structure, regardless of what the structure needs. I know, Harry said. Knowing it and being prepared for it are different things. I'm prepared. He held Snape's gaze. Are you? Because I think you're going to have to make a decision soon about which side of a line you're on, and I'd rather know now whether I'm going to be surprised. Snape looked at him for a long, assessing moment. I made my decision, Snape said, the night I told Dumbledore your family was in danger. I've been paying for it since. It wasn't a declaration. But it was, Harry decided, enough. Good, he said, and left. He found Malfoy by the lake that evening. Not looking for him specifically, the castle had flagged Malfoy's location with the mild insistence it used when it considered something relevant, and Harry had learned to trust these suggestions the way you trust your own instincts once you've established they're reliable. Malfoy was standing at the water's edge throwing small stones in with the contemplative futility of someone who has nowhere useful to direct their nervous energy. He heard Harry coming and turned, and the defensive preparation on his face settled into something more neutral when he saw who it was. I need to ask you about the room of requirement, Harry said, without preamble. Malfoy went very still. The stone he'd been about to throw stayed in his hand. What you're doing in there, Harry said. How long has it been going on? I don't know what you're, Malfoy. His voice was even, not accusatory. I can feel everyone in the castle. I know you've been in that room for hours at a stretch for weeks. I'm not asking to expose you. I'm asking because something's in that room that shouldn't be there, and I need to understand whether it got there before or after you started using it." Malfoy stared at him. The stone fell from his fingers into the grass. "How long has the room felt wrong to you?" Harry asked. A pause. Malfoy's jaw worked. "Since the beginning of term," he said finally. "The room gives you what you need, but sometimes there's something underneath it. Like the room is trying to tell you something's in it already and it doesn't want to be sharing space with whatever." He stopped. "I thought it was my imagination." "It's not." Malfoy looked out at the lake. The giant squid's tentacle surfaced briefly near the middle and disappeared again. "What's in there?" "Something that belongs to Voldemort," Harry said. "Something he hid there. Something I need to find and destroy." The silence that followed was complicated. Malfoy was thinking. Harry could almost see the architecture of it, the private calculations, the things he was weighing. His obligations to his father. The Dark Lord's mark that Malfoy didn't have yet, but that was circling closer. The fact that he'd just last week told Harry he wasn't his enemy. The fact that he'd told Snape about the room feeling wrong, Harry suspected, and Snape had told him to leave it alone. What would it take? Malfoy said quietly. To destroy it. I'm not sure yet. I know what it is. I need Hermione to help me work out the method. If I help you get to it, Malfoy stopped. Started again. He turned from the lake and looked at Harry directly with the specific courage of someone deciding to say a thing that can't be unsaid. If I help you, and he finds out, my family, I know, Harry said. I'm not asking you for that. I'm not asking you to do anything that puts your family at more risk than they're already in. He paused. But if you decide you want to, if you think it's the right thing, the castle will make sure it looks like the room was accessed by someone else. I can ask it to do that. Malfoy looked at him. You'd cover for me. If you help me with something this important, yes. Another silence. Malfoy picked up a different stone from the ground, looked at it for a moment, and then threw it. It skipped twice on the lake's surface before being very deliberately knocked under by a tentacle that had been waiting nearby. I haven't done anything useful this entire year, Malfoy said, to the lake rather than to Harry. Everything I've done has been small and mean and I've known it the whole time. He turned. Tell me what you need. They went to the room of requirement after dinner, all four of them, Harry, Hermione, Ron, and Malfoy, which produced a dynamic that was deeply odd in a way that none of them commented on because commenting would have required processing it, and there wasn't time. Malfoy led them to the correct door because he knew the approach that the room had been responding to. Harry felt the room before they opened it, felt it the way he'd felt the assassin, the same particular wrongness, the same sense of something the castle didn't want to host being in it anyway. The Horcrux was in here. He was certain. Hermione had done the research in the 3 hours between Harry asking her and now, which was honestly not surprising. She'd had a theory about the castle Horcrux since Tuesday, had been sitting on it waiting for Harry to confirm, and had the relevant texts already flagged. Fiendfire would destroy it, she said, but we can't control Fiendfire. The basilisk venom from Harry's second year destroyed the diary, but we don't have venom. She paused. But the sword of Gryffindor is impregnated with basilisk venom. It absorbed it in the Chamber of Secrets. If the sword in the Founder's Chamber is, I know what the sword is, Harry said. He'd held it. He'd felt what it carried. The particular quality of Gryffindor's magic and underneath it the cold, clean edge of venom that had been embedded in the blade for 3 years, since a 12-year-old had stabbed a basilisk and then nearly died for the effort. He'd brought it. It was under his robes, which had required creative thinking, but the castle had helped with that too, adjusting the spatial dimensions of the passage in a way that had made Hermione's eyes go very wide. The room of requirement opened to them as a vast junk repository, the come-and-go room, the hidden space, years of accumulated Hogwarts detritus, stacked and towered, old furniture and failed experiments and broken equipment piled in arrangements that would have been impressive if they weren't also slightly claustrophobic. Harry felt for the Horcrux. It was there, deeper in the room, further back, in a section where the junk was piled more densely, where something had arranged itself around an object that didn't want to be found. He led them through the stacks. The castle's awareness was muted in here, too much interference, too many objects with their own ambient magic, like trying to hear a specific voice in a crowd, but the Horcrux's particular wrongness was a stronger signal than anything else, a splinter feeling amplified. They found it on a bust wearing a wig and a tiara. Not Ravenclaw's diadem. Harry had compared the signature of what he'd worn in the chamber this morning to what he was feeling now, and they were completely different. This was a copy, or a decoy, or something that had been placed here to look like one thing while being another. It was a diadem, certainly. Silver, with a sapphire. But where Ravenclaw's had felt like clarity, like the pause before understanding, this felt like a mirror with something wrong behind it, like a window that showed you a view but the view wasn't attached to any real place. Wit beyond measure is man's greatest treasure, read the inscription along the rim, and under it the particular diseased magic of a soul fragment, old and angry and frightened and clinging with the desperation of things that have been separated from their source. Malfoy looked at it from 3 steps away. His expression was composed but his hands weren't. That's what's been in here. Yes, Harry said. The whole time. Apparently. And every student who's used this room all year has been sharing a space with a piece of, he stopped. Swallowed. Right. Harry drew the sword. The blade caught the faint light of Hermione's wand and ran silver, and at its edge, almost invisible, the dark taint of venom that had been the permanent legacy of a 12-year-old's terrible courage. He thought about what he was about to do. Not hesitating, thinking. There was a difference. He was thinking about what the diadem's inscription said and what it would mean to destroy something that had once been a vessel of Ravenclaw's magic before Voldemort defiled it, and he was thinking about the soul fragment inside it and whether it could feel anything at all, and he was deciding that it didn't matter because whatever might have felt was gone long ago and what remained was only the damage. He brought the sword down. The sound it made was not dramatic. A crack, a flash of black light that went nowhere, not outward but inward, collapsing, like something being pulled through a very small hole, and then a shriek that was almost subsonic, felt rather than heard, a vibration in the chest that had no external source. And then nothing. The diadem was still there, intact to the eye, but to Harry's awareness it was completely empty. Hollowed. A cup someone had drunk dry. Ron let out a long breath. How many is that? Malfoy asked. His voice was steady and Harry respected him for it. 2 that I know of are gone, Harry said. Including the diary. He looked at the empty diadem. There are more. How many more? I don't know exactly. Enough that he thinks he's safe. He sheathed the sword. He's not. Hermione was looking at Malfoy with an expression that was doing something complex and private, the look she got when she was revising a long-held opinion in real time and wasn't entirely comfortable with the process. Thank you, she said, to Malfoy. For telling Harry about the room feeling wrong. Malfoy looked slightly as though she'd addressed him in an unfamiliar language. It would have been poor judgment not to, he said finally, which was both deflection and, Harry suspected, absolutely true. Neville was waiting for them when they came out. He was sitting on the floor against the opposite wall with his wand in his hand and an expression that said he'd been there long enough to be comfortable with not knowing how long it would take, which was the particular patience of someone who'd committed to a waiting position and was going to see it through. He looked at the 4 of them coming out, including Malfoy, which he took in without visible surprise, and stood up. Done? He asked Harry. 1 more down. Good. He looked at Malfoy briefly, not unfriendly, not warm, just assessing. The DA is meeting tonight. Angelina's found a new slot. He turned back to Harry. There are 6 new people who want in. 3 Hufflepuffs and 3, he paused, 3 Slytherins. Harry looked at Malfoy. Malfoy's expression was careful. Not me, he said. I'm not, it wouldn't look right, with my family's position. But I'm not going to report it. A pause. I might mention to certain people that their time would be well spent. Right, Neville said, and Harry could see him filing this information away in the private, efficient way he'd developed. Neville's mind worked differently from Hermione's, less textual, more situational, a map of relationships and positions and what each person would do when pressed. He was good at it. Tell Angelina yes, Harry said. All 6. He paused. Tell her to teach them everything. We're done being cautious about what we know. Neville nodded once. He started to go, then stopped. Harry. The Ministry's going to make another move. I heard McGonagall telling Flitwick that Fudge received a brief about the ring from someone inside the council. He doesn't sound stable. He frowned. McGonagall said he's frightened. Good, Harry said. For the second time in a week, and with increasing conviction. Neville left. Malfoy left, in a different direction, with the careful nonchalance of someone who has decided nothing he's just done needs to be visible. Hermione was already pulling out her notebook. Ron fell into step beside Harry as they walked back toward the tower. You knew Neville was out there waiting, Ron said. The castle told me he was there. He didn't know you knew. No. But he waited anyway. Ron was quiet for a moment. He's changed, you know. Since the start of term. Not because of the ring business. Before that. But whatever's happening now it's accelerating something that was already happening. Harry thought about Neville at the beginning of first year, round-faced and terrified of getting everything wrong. He thought about Neville in the corridor, hand moving toward his wand without announcement. He thought about Neville sitting against a wall in the dark for an indeterminate amount of time on the chance that his help would be needed. He's not becoming someone else, Harry said. He's becoming himself. It's just taking the world this long to notice. Ron considered this. Same could be said for you. Harry looked at him. You were always going to be this, Ron said, with the simple directness that was his greatest quality. The ring didn't make you anything. It just, he gestured vaguely at Harry's hand. Told the room what you already were. Harry was quiet for a moment. The castle moved around them, familiar and warm, old stone and lamp fire and the deep resonant presence of a building that had decided, 1,000 years ago, that it would wait for this specific person, and had done so with the patient fidelity of something built to last. Ron, Harry said. Yeah. Thank you for being my friend. From the start. Ron looked at him sideways with the particular expression of someone who is touched and would strongly prefer not to be visibly touched. Don't make it weird, he said. Harry smiled. Too late. Yeah, Ron said, and smiled back. Probably. They climbed the rest of the way to Gryffindor Tower in comfortable quiet, and above them the castle breathed around its old wounds, patient and watchful, carrying its 1,000-year history the way all living things carry their scars, not as damage, but as proof of what they'd survived. Chapter 5, The War Comes Home. The first sign was the owls. Not post-owls, the Owlery had its own rhythm that Harry knew well by now, the morning surge and the afternoon drift and the occasional late-night oddity. This was different. At 7 in the morning on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the Horcrux in the Room of Requirement, the Owlery went silent. Not the gradual quieting of birds settling in for the day, a sudden collective stillness, every bird in the tower going motionless at once with the instinctive unity of animals that feel something coming. Harry felt it through the castle the same moment the owls did. A disturbance at the perimeter. Not inside the wards, the eastern gap had been repaired after the assassin, and the remaining boundaries were, to Harry's awareness, solid. Whatever this was sat just outside. Pressing. Testing. He was at breakfast when it happened and he set down his pumpkin juice and was still for a moment in a way that made Ron stop mid-sentence and look at him. What is it? Ron said. Something at the boundary. Harry pushed back from the table. Not through it. Yet. Hermione was already on her feet. She'd learned to read his stillness the way you learn to read weather, the particular quality of his attention when the castle was speaking to him had a recognizable shape by now. Death Eaters? I don't know. He felt along the perimeter carefully. The ward line was a sensation like running a hand along a fence in the dark, the solid portions reassuring, the pressure point alarming in the specific way of something heavy leaning against a surface to find where it gives. The pressure was coming from the west, from the forest side, and it wasn't a single point. It was distributed. Multiple sources. How many? Ron asked. Enough to be a statement, Harry said. Come on. He went to Dumbledore first. Not for permission, for information. There was a difference, and the difference mattered, and Dumbledore had been good enough at honoring it since their renegotiated dynamic that Harry trusted the meeting would be productive. Dumbledore was already at his window when Harry arrived, which meant he'd felt it too, or been told, or both. He turned when Harry entered and his expression had the particular alertness of a man setting aside everything that isn't immediate. You feel it, Dumbledore said. Since 7. It's a screen, not an assault. They're not trying to break through, they're trying to make us react. Harry stood in the middle of the office. This is a feint. He wants me outside the wards. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment. That is my assessment as well. How many order members can you get here in the next hour? A sufficient number. A pause. Harry. If this is indeed a feint, the actual target may be elsewhere. He may be trying to draw your attention to the perimeter while something moves inside. Harry was already checking. He swept his awareness through the castle, every corridor, every room, every space the castle claimed as its own. Students at breakfast, teachers at their posts, the chamber below the lake sealed and quiet, the room of requirement empty since the night they destroyed the Horcrux. The castle felt clean. It felt, he stopped. There's something in the forest, he said slowly. Just inside the tree line. Not on the castle's ground. Not outside it either. Right at the edge of where the castle's awareness ends. He felt for it carefully, the way you feel for something in the dark without wanting to touch it by accident. Something large. Stationary. It's been there for at least 12 hours. Dumbledore went still. Describe the quality of it. Harry considered. It feels like something between alive and not. Like something that was alive and is now, the word I keep finding is arranged. Like something's been placed there. A very old wariness moved through Dumbledore's expression, the kind that has specific memories attached to it. A creature, he said. Probably a giant. Possibly two. He paused. Voldemort has been recruiting among the giant colonies in the north. A giant. That changed the tactical picture considerably. Giants couldn't cross the wards. The ward line specifically excluded beings of that mass from the castle grounds, a precaution the founders had built in with presumably some relevant historical context. But a giant at the forest's edge could do considerable damage to the approaches, could block retreat routes, could terrify students if seen, could serve as a second screen while the pressure at the western perimeter served as the first. Voldemort was boxing in the exits. Trying to make the castle feel like a trap rather than a stronghold. He wants me to panic, Harry said. Or to make a decision from a position of incomplete information, Dumbledore said. Which amounts to the same thing. Then I won't. Harry turned to go. Get the order here. Put them on the perimeter, not to engage, just visible presence. I'm going to address the school. Dumbledore raised an eyebrow. The school. 400 students in this building. I'd rather they hear what's happening from me than piece it together from whispers and rumor by noon. He paused at the door. And it'll let Voldemort know I'm in here. Calm. Not reacting. Making him wait. The eyebrow came back down. That, Dumbledore said, is excellent strategy. The diadem helps, Harry said, and meant it. He gathered the school in the Great Hall at 8:15. Not through an announcement, through the castle. He asked it to guide people there, a gentle thing, the way a current guides water rather than forcing it, and students and teachers arrived with the vague sense that this was where they needed to be without being entirely certain why. By 8:25, all 4 house tables were full and the staff had assembled along the high table and the hall had the dense, anticipatory quiet of a large gathering that knows something significant is about to happen. Harry stood where the teachers usually stood, not behind the lectern but in front of it, on the raised dais with the 4 house tables spreading out below him. He looked at the school. 400 faces. His school. His responsibility. He didn't prepare a speech. He didn't need one. There are Death Eaters at the western perimeter, he said, without preamble. The hall's ambient murmur went flat and silent. They're not coming through the wards are holding and they'll continue to hold. There's also what we think is at least one giant in the forest, sitting at the edge of the grounds. A ripple of fear through the room. Audible, chairs shifting, sharp breaths, someone at the Hufflepuff table making a small sound. I want to be clear about something, Harry said, and his voice didn't rise to fill the room, it didn't need to, the acoustics of a hall that had been built with intention carried it easily. Hogwarts is the safest building in Britain. Not because of politics or reputation. Because of what it is. The castle itself is a ward, a guardian, a presence that has been standing here protecting the people inside it for 1,000 years. Nothing that's at the perimeter right now can come through it. I know this because I can feel the wards. He held up his right hand briefly, the ring catching the great hall's morning light and running its colors. I'm not asking you to feel brave. I'm asking you to trust where you are. The room was very still. What I need, he continued, is for everyone to know what's happening so that when you hear things, from other students, from owls, from however rumor moves through this school, you'll have the true version to compare it against. What's happening is that Voldemort is trying to frighten us into making a mistake. We're not going to make one. Neville, at the Gryffindor table, caught Harry's eye and gave him one firm nod. Ron was sitting with his arms crossed and his jaw set in the way he had when he decided something was going to be fine and was physically manifesting that decision. Hermione had her hands flat on the table and was watching Harry with an expression that was composed and proud and privately terrified in a way only he could see, because he knew her well enough to distinguish all three. Luna Lovegood, at the Ravenclaw table, was eating toast with complete serenity, as though the announcement of Death Eaters at the perimeter was an expected weather event that she'd dressed appropriately for. DA members, Harry said, I'd like you to position yourselves in the corridors after this, in pairs, just moving visibility. Not armed posture, just visible. Students seeing familiar faces being calm is worth more than 20 Aurors on the roof. He looked across the hall. Everyone else, classes will continue as scheduled. If anything changes, I'll tell you directly. Not through an owl or a decree or a rumor. Directly. He stepped back. The hall held its silence for another beat, and then it broke into movement and sound, not the panicked fracture of a group that's been told something terrible, but the purposeful noise of people who have been given information and are deciding what to do with it. There was fear in the room, yes. But fear and chaos were different things, and the difference was whether people felt they knew what was happening and trusted the person telling them. Harry stepped down from the dais and Hermione materialized beside him immediately. The giant, she said quietly. If it moves toward the castle, the wards will stop it at the boundary. But if it decides to be aggressive at the forest edge, anyone using the grounds will be in danger. He thought about care of magical creatures, about Hagrid, about the third-year Hufflepuffs who had a lesson on the South Lawn at 11. I need to talk to Hagrid. Hagrid loves giants, Ron said, appearing on Harry's other side. I know, Harry said. That's exactly why I need to talk to him. Hagrid was already at the edge of the forest when Harry got there, which was not entirely surprising. Hagrid had the same relationship to large dangerous creatures that Hermione had to large dangerous problems, drawn toward them with professional interest in a way that slightly overrode ordinary self-preservation instincts. He was standing at the tree line looking into the forest with binoculars that were roughly the size of a small television, his crossbow slung over his shoulder in the casual way of someone who considers it a polite accessory. "Grop's not far," Hagrid said without turning around, which meant he'd heard Harry coming despite the crossbow and the binoculars and his own considerable mass. "He'll protect the border." "From the other giant?" "Giants have territories," Hagrid said, lowering the binoculars and turning. His expression had the complex quality it got when large sentient beings were involved: concern, loyalty, practical assessment all layered over each other. "Grop's been living in this forest since summer. This is his ground. Other one comes through, there'll be a disagreement. Can you communicate with Grop if things escalate? Enough to keep him from moving toward the castle?" "He listens to me most of the time." A pause. "Most of the time." Harry accepted this as the appropriate degree of optimism for the situation. "I'm going to extend the boundary awareness as far into the forest as I can," he said. "It won't be precise, the castle doesn't fully claim the forest, but it'll give me warning if something large moves." "You can do that?" "I've been practicing the range." He looked into the trees. The forest was dark even in morning light, old growth dense enough that 10 feet in became its own separate world. He could feel the edge of the castle's awareness as a distinct line, like standing at the boundary of a lit space and looking into dark. He pressed outward, carefully, testing how far the castle would reach when he asked it to. It went further than he expected. Maybe 100 feet into the trees. Not enough to find the giant, but enough to feel if something was moving toward the boundary at speed. "Good enough," he said. "Hagrid, if you can talk to Grop at noon and let him know what's happening, already planning on it." Hagrid looked at him with the expression he'd had since the ring, slightly overwhelmed, deeply certain. "Harry. You know I'm with you. Whatever comes." "I know," Harry said. "I've always known." The pressure at the western perimeter held through the morning, neither advancing nor retreating, and Harry let it hold. He was in charms, then transfiguration, present in both in a way that he managed partly for the students around him, because if Harry Potter was sitting in transfiguration doing the day's work while Death Eaters sat at the perimeter, it sent a clear message about who was anxious, and partly because transfiguration had a specific piece of work due that he'd actually prepared for and it would be a waste not to complete it. McGonagall graded his work at the end of the lesson and said nothing, but the look she gave him had at least 3 things in it. The order arrived at 10. Harry felt them come through the ward line, authorized by Dumbledore's counter-sequence, each arrival a small warmth of familiar magic. He recognized Moody's particular magical signature the way you recognize someone's gait. Tonks he knew from summer. Lupin he felt and then stopped in the middle of the corridor and stood there for a moment. Remus Lupin, his father's best surviving friend, was inside the ward line. Harry had known abstractly that Lupin was order, had known he'd potentially be among the people Dumbledore called. Knowing it abstractly and feeling his magical presence in the castle were different things, the same way knowing someone's name and hearing their voice are different. He finished walking to his next class. The attack came at 2:15 in the afternoon. Not from the western perimeter. Not from the forest side, though that was the direction Harry's attention had been shaped toward all morning. It came from underneath, a tunnel breach, something that had been worked on for days or possibly weeks, a passage dug below the ward line's depth range, which turned out to be shallower than anyone had checked because ward maintenance at Hogwarts had been a headmaster's responsibility and headmaster's responsibilities had been crowded out by ministry interference and the ongoing difficulty of running a school at normal capacity during a war. The castle felt the breach the moment it happened, and it felt it like pain, not a metaphor, or not only a metaphor, but a genuine response to damage, the sensation of a defensive layer violated, and it transmitted that sensation to Harry with the directness of something that shared his nervous system. He was in the middle of defense against the dark arts. He stood up. Umbridge started to say something. Harry looked at her with an expression that was not unkind but was completely unambiguous about the current hierarchy of priorities, and she stopped. "Everyone stay in the classroom," he said to the room. "Lock the door after me. Colloportus on the inside. Don't open it until someone you know well says your name." He left. He found Neville in the corridor already moving toward him. The DA network was good, had been good since they'd started taking it seriously, and Neville had people at useful positions throughout the building. "Third floor, east corridor," Neville said. Something came up through the floor. "The stones just," he gestured. Students ran. "McGonagall's already there." "How many Death Eaters?" "3 that we know of. There might be more in the tunnel." "The tunnel's the problem," Harry said, already moving. "We seal the entry point, we contain whatever's in the corridor, and we make sure nothing else comes through." "Can you seal the tunnel?" "Through the castle?" "I can." He could feel it already, the breach, the particular wrongness of it, the castle's aggrieved awareness of the foreign tunnel connecting through its foundations. He could close it. He'd known since the second week of his castle sense what the closure would feel like, had felt for it the way you feel for the shape of a skill you know you have but haven't used yet. "But not while I'm fighting. It requires," he tried to find the word. "Stillness. Attention. Then I'll clear the corridor," Neville said simply. He said it the way someone says "I'll get the milk," not a boast, a practicality. Harry looked at him and saw the 14 months of DA meetings, the 50 sessions of practice spells, the private hours Neville had put in after everyone else stopped, working until he got things right not because anyone was watching but because he'd decided this was what he was going to be good at. "Right," Harry said. "I'll be with you. I'll keep them occupied while you work. Then I seal." "Works for me." They came around the corner onto the third-floor east corridor and the scene resolved quickly. McGonagall was at one end, her wand out, exchanging spells with a Death Eater in grey robes who was using one of the old stone pillars as cover. 2 other Death Eaters, one man, one woman, both masked, were moving along the corridor walls with the careful tactical spacing of people who trained together. 4 fifth-year Hufflepuffs were crouched at the far end behind an overturned bench, all of them with wands drawn and looking like they very much wanted something useful to do with them. Harry took it in the space of a full second. The stone floor near the window alcove had buckled upward, crude, ugly work, not magic but something more fundamental, physical force displacing the stones from below. The breach. He met McGonagall's eyes across the corridor. She gave him one sharp nod that communicated 6 things simultaneously, which was impressive efficiency even for her. "Hey," Harry said, loudly, stepping fully into the corridor. All 3 Death Eaters turned. That was the thing about him that he'd been learning to use, the name, the reputation, the 3-inch scar, all of it created an involuntary attention reflex in anyone who'd lived in the wizarding world for the last 15 years. Even trained fighters. Even people who'd been told not to hesitate. They hesitated. For 1 second. Neville moved on the left flank during that second, coming in low and fast with Stupefy at the nearer of the 2 wall Death Eaters, clean and well aimed, and the man went down before he'd finished processing what he was reacting to. The woman swung toward Neville. Harry said Expelliarmus with the full castle weight behind it, the same thing he'd used on the assassin in the corridor, the full resonant force of the building behind a single spell, and the woman's wand didn't just leave her hand, it flew the length of the corridor and embedded itself point first in the opposite wall with a crack that left a dent. She reached for a secondary weapon. Harry said Petrificus Totalis and she went rigid and hit the floor. That left McGonagall's pillar-sheltering Death Eater. He'd seen what happened to his partners and had done the arithmetic, and he was no longer crouching behind the pillar, he was running for the breach in the floor, for the tunnel back down, for exit. McGonagall hit him with a body bind that had the particular precision of someone who'd been teaching magic for 40 years. He fell 2 feet from the breach. 4 seconds. Maybe 5. The 4 Hufflepuffs behind the bench looked at each other. "Good," Harry said to the corridor generally, already moving toward the breach. "Now everyone get back." He crouched beside the buckled stones and pressed his palms flat against the floor the way he'd pressed his hand against the sealed wall in the dungeons on the first night. The castle's awareness reached down through the foundations, he could feel the tunnel below, roughly dug, reinforced with crude magic, about 40 feet long before it emerged outside the ward line. It was empty now. No one else coming through, at least not immediately. He closed it. The sensation was like making a fist. The castle gathered itself and pressed down, and the tunnel, which had been cut through foundations that were more than 1,000 years old and had opinions about being cut through, ceased to exist in the way that water ceases to exist when ice forms around it. Not destroyed, exactly. Reincorporated. The stones moved back with a grinding rumble that lasted 3 seconds and then stopped, and the floor was floor again. Harry straightened. He looked at the corridor. 3 incapacitated Death Eaters on the stone floor, McGonagall standing over one of them with her wand still raised and an expression of someone who has settled a question, Neville checking the corridor in both directions with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this in drills 100 times and was now doing it for real. The Hufflepuffs came out from behind the bench. One of them, a girl Harry recognized from herbology, Susan Bones, looked at the sealed floor and then at Harry. "Did you just," she started. "Yes," Harry said. "The castle, yes." She looked at him with large eyes. "Can you teach us to do that?" "That specific thing, no. But come to DA." He turned to Neville. "Anyone hurt?" Neville was already checking. "We're clean." McGonagall. "Quite all right," McGonagall said, in the tone she used for things that had been considerably less than all right but were now over. She looked at the Death Eater at her feet and then at Harry. "The tunnel, is it sealed permanently?" "Until I'm asked to open it, yes. I'll want to examine the ward depth configuration with Dumbledore. There should never have been a gap that, I know. We can look at the full perimeter when this is resolved." He glanced at the western windows. The pressure there was still constant, unchanged. "They're still holding the feint. They don't know the tunnel breach failed yet." McGonagall followed his gaze. "What do you want to do about the perimeter?" He thought about this carefully. The feint was working, in the sense that it had drawn order attention to the west while the tunnel was opened in the east. It had failed, because the castle had felt the tunnel and told him, and he'd been able to respond faster than any external intelligence could have predicted. But Voldemort didn't know it had failed yet. The Death Eaters at the perimeter were waiting for a signal that wasn't coming. "Let them wait a little longer," Harry said. "And then let's give them a reason to leave." At 3 o'clock, with Dumbledore's agreement and the coordination of the Order members at the western perimeter, Harry walked to the outer edge of the western ward line. Alone. He'd told Ron and Hermione to stay back, which had produced exactly the argument he'd expected and which he'd ended by pointing out, calmly, that he could feel everything within a quarter mile and would know within a second if anything moved, and that 2 more people at the ward line would give the Death Eaters additional targets without changing the tactical situation in any useful way. "And if they curse you from a distance?" Hermione said. "The ward line will deflect anything thrown from outside it. I'm going to stand inside it. You're going to stand at the ward line in front of a group of Death Eaters, and let them look at me," he said. "That's the entire plan." She'd stared at him. "That's not a plan, that's a message." He met her eyes. "I need Voldemort to understand that what happened today, the tunnel, the feint, all of it, ended with me standing at my ward line, unbothered, not having moved off the grounds, not having reacted the way he needed me to react." He paused. "I'm not going to fight his battle. I'm going to make him fight mine." She had let him go. That was the thing about Hermione, she argued until she understood the reasoning, and when she understood it, she trusted it, and that trust was worth more than any agreement he could have asked for. He stood at the western ward line at 3 o'clock in clear October afternoon light with his hands in his pockets and the ring on his finger and the castle warm and solid behind him, and he looked at the tree line where 11 Death Eaters were positioned in the shadows. He could see them because the light was at the right angle and they were standing still enough that the forest's movement, wind and branches, outlined them by contrast. He could feel them through the castle's perimeter awareness, their particular presence against the ward line like fingers pressed against glass. He stood there for 5 minutes and did nothing. This, he'd found, was the most unsettling thing you could do to a person who had come expecting a reaction. Not aggression, not defiance, not fear. Just presence. Unhurried. Patient. Entirely comfortable on his own ground. On the 4th minute, he felt one of the Death Eaters move. A small adjustment, not an advance. The movement of someone who is uncertain and has shifted their weight without intending to. On the 5th minute, he felt what he'd been waiting to feel, a change in the pressure of the group, the way a group's energy changes when a collective decision is forming. They were assessing. They were calculating. And they were, Harry was fairly certain, coming to the conclusion that the scenario they'd been given, wait at the perimeter and apply pressure until the target makes a move, had been constructed on an assumption about the target's behavior that was no longer valid. He turned and walked back to the castle. He felt them pull back from the perimeter at 4 o'clock, confirmed it through the ward line at 4:15, and had the information to Dumbledore by 4:20. Umbridge's last scene at Hogwarts happened quietly and without drama, which was exactly what she deserved. The Ministry, in the wake of the failed attack, had several urgent priorities that overrode their interest in managing Hogwarts. 3 captured Death Eaters in McGonagall's custody were considerably more important than maintaining their oversight presence at the school. Fudge, according to McGonagall's source at the Ministry, had spent the afternoon of the attack in a series of escalating meetings that had ended with him acknowledging, in writing, that the ongoing situation required him to direct all available Ministry resources to external security rather than educational oversight. The withdrawal of Ministry support for Umbridge's position was not announced. It was simply, the ground disappeared under her. Her authority, such as it had been, had rested on the Ministry's political willingness to push it, and that political willingness had run out faster than anyone's patience, which was saying something. She came to Harry on Wednesday morning. He was in the library, alone, working through one of Slytherin's sections of the chamber wall that Hermione had now fully translated, and he was beginning to practice, a specific type of magic that wasn't on any Hogwarts curriculum, not because it was dark, but because it was old, predating the categories that divided magic into types and required a caster to work from intention rather than form. Umbridge came in with her clipboard and her pink robes and none of the sweetness. Just the flat, tired face of someone who has run out of costume. She stopped in front of his table and looked at him and he looked back. "I'm leaving Hogwarts," she said. "I know." A pause. "The Ministry has redirected my assignment." "I know that too." She looked at the ring on his hand. Then at his face. There was no contempt in her expression now. No calculation either. Something more basic, the look of someone assessing what they misjudged and arriving at the scale of it. "You could have moved against me more directly," she said. "At any point. You had the authority from the 3rd day." "Yes. Why didn't you?" He considered the question seriously, because it deserved a serious answer. "Because making it about you would have been the wrong use of what I have," he said. "You were a symptom. The problem is the Ministry believing it can control something it didn't build and doesn't understand." He paused. The educational decrees being void was something that needed to exist on record. The legal precedent needed to be established cleanly. Removing you dramatically would have obscured that. She looked at him for a long moment. "You're 16, she said. "Yes. That's," she stopped. Whatever she'd been going to say, she decided against it. She turned to go and then, at the library door, stopped without turning back. "The students whose hands you let me," she stopped again. "The detentions." He waited. "I was aware," she said, very quietly, "that it was excessive." She said it to the door rather than to him. "I want you to know that I was aware." She left without waiting for his response, and her footsteps were quick and light on the library stone, the footsteps of someone who is moving toward an exit before they change their mind. Harry looked at the scar on the back of his right hand. "I must not tell lies," raised and permanent and fading slightly since September but never going to be entirely gone. He thought about what she'd said. That she'd been aware. He didn't forgive her. He didn't have to. But he understood her, which was a different thing, and understanding was the business he was increasingly finding himself in. He went back to his translation. That evening, the castle felt different. Not troubled, the opposite. Lighter. As though a weight that had been sitting in it since September had been removed, and the building's thousand-year personality, which was fundamentally inclined toward being a school and educating people and doing so without ministry interference, had reasserted itself in the way that old things assert themselves when the temporary obstruction is removed. Harry sat in the common room with his friends, all of them, by some arrangement that nobody had organized, Ron and Hermione and Neville and Luna, who had again accessed the Gryffindor common room through unclear means and was cross-legged on the hearthrug with Crookshanks purring beside her as though she'd been doing this for years. "She's gone?" Ron asked. "She'll be gone by morning." "And the educational decrees?" "Null as of 3 weeks ago. The copies on the walls will come down when I ask the castle to remove them, which I plan to do tomorrow." Ron looked at the fire with the satisfied expression of someone completing a mental checklist. "The tunnel's sealed. The tunnel's sealed. The Horcrux in the room is destroyed." "Yes. The perimeter held." "The perimeter held." "Malfoy's, what, not an enemy?" "Not currently. The ministry's backed off. For now." Ron turned to look at him. "So what are we worried about?" "Voldemort," Harry said. "He made a move today and it failed. He'll be working out why. He'll work out that the tunnel should have been impossible to detect from inside the castle, and yet it was detected, and he'll start understanding what that means." He paused. "He's going to come personally. And when he does, he's going to come directly for me." The fire crackled. Luna was watching the flames with the slightly unfocused gaze of someone reading them rather than looking at them. "The Department of Mysteries," Hermione said. She'd been quiet for most of the evening, the quiet she went into when she was several thoughts ahead of the conversation and was waiting for it to catch up. "The Horcrux there. We need it before he moves. Going to the ministry, I know." He looked at his hand. "The ring. If I go in as myself, it becomes an incident. International coverage, political fallout, Voldemort knows exactly where I am." He thought about the challenge of it, the Ministry of Magic, the Department of Mysteries, a Horcrux inside a building designed specifically to be difficult to navigate. But the Ministry doesn't control Hogwarts. And Hogwarts has a fluke connection that I can adjust the destination parameters of. Hermione sat up straighter. "You can change where the fluke connects. It's a castle administration function. I found it in the chamber translations." He paused. "I can connect the Gryffindor Tower fluid directly to the Department of Mysteries without going through the Ministry's network. They won't see us arriving because we won't come through their wards." Hermione stared at him. "Harry. She stopped. Started again. "That's extraordinary." "I know. When?" He thought about it. He needed the next Horcrux before Voldemort moved. He needed it done before the Ministry recovered its footing after today and tried to re-establish some form of presence at Hogwarts. He needed it done before Voldemort understood what he'd built here and came to dismantle it personally. 3 days, he said. "I need 2 more days in the chamber with the translations, and then we go." "We," Ron said firmly. "Yes. All of us," Neville said. He wasn't asking. His jaw was set in the way it got when he'd made a decision and had no interest in revisiting it. "All of us or none of us." Harry looked around the circle. Ron, arms crossed, completely certain. Hermione, quill already in hand, already calculating what she needed to prepare. Neville, steady and committed. Luna, who had stopped watching the fire and was watching Harry instead with her particular clear-eyed attention, the look of someone who sees several layers simultaneously. "Someone should have been in your corner from the very beginning," Luna said. Not as commentary on the present, as a statement about something longer. "You've been alone in important rooms too many times." She tilted her head. I'm glad you're not anymore. The fire was warm. The castle breathed around them, old stone and lamp fire, a building that had been built for this exact purpose, not the specifics of Horcruxes and ministry floors, but the general purpose of keeping people safe while they prepared for difficult things. A school. An old, loyal, particular school that had been waiting for someone to arrive and let it do its job properly. Outside, the grounds were dark and quiet. The perimeter was clear. The forest was still. In its depths, Grop had apparently and definitively addressed the territorial question, because there was nothing in the castle's awareness that felt like a second giant anywhere within range. Harry let himself feel it for a moment, not safety, exactly, because safety would be naive, but the specific comfort of being in the right place, at the right time, with the right people, about to do something that needed to be done. 3 days. He could wait 3 days. Chapter 6, Lord of the Founders. The Department of Mysteries was exactly as Harry remembered it from his dreams. Circular room, black walls, multiple identical doors arranged around the circumference like a question with too many answers. The difference between dreaming it and standing in it was the smell, cold stone and something chemical underneath, the particular antiseptic quality of a place where magic was studied in controlled conditions. His dreams had never had a smell. Reality always did. The fluke connection had worked precisely as he'd calculated. One moment they were in the Gryffindor common room at 2 in the morning, and then they were here, in the atrium-level corridor, stepping through not into the ministry's public halls but directly into the department's outer chamber via a routing adjustment that had required 40 minutes of focused work with the castle's floor architecture and had produced in Hermione the specific reverence she reserved for things that were genuinely new in her experience. All 5 of them. Harry, Ron, Hermione, Neville, Luna. No cloaks. Harry had decided against it. If they ran into anyone down here, concealment would matter less than confidence. He'd been right about this in the castle corridor and he was right about it here. This place, Ron said quietly, looking at the circular room with the expression of someone whose spatial instincts were already objecting to the geometry. The doors all look the same. They're not, Harry said. He could feel the Horcrux somewhere ahead. Not through the castle, they were well outside the castle's awareness now, and the loss of it was notable, a kind of quiet where there'd been background warmth. But the particular wrongness of a soul fragment was its own signal, something he'd learned to feel since the room of requirement, and it was coming from behind the third door on the right. Come on. Luna touched his arm. The room with the veil, she said, very quietly. Don't go in there. He looked at her. I wasn't planning to. Good. She released his arm. It's the one that feels like home to people who've lost someone. It's difficult to leave if you go in missing someone. Nobody said anything to this. Harry thought about Sirius and moved forward. The third door opened to a long rectangular room lined with glass-fronted shelves that reached the ceiling, and on every shelf, thousands of small glowing orbs, prophecy records, spinning slowly in their containment spheres, each one labeled with a small card at its base. The room hummed with accumulated significance, 500 years of prophecies made and stored and mostly never collected by the people they concerned. Harry was not looking at the prophecies. He was looking at the object in the center of the room, on a stone plinth that had no business being there, not a ministry installation, something placed, something that had been here longer than the current ministry configuration of the room, something that predated the shelving and the organizational system and had simply been incorporated into the room's layout the way old things get incorporated into new structures because nobody knows what else to do with them. A locket. Not Slytherin's locket from the chamber. Another one, smaller, older, black enameled with a serpent worked in green that had the flat, wrong quality of all Horcruxes, beautiful to look at and diseased underneath. Harry had expected it to be hidden. He hadn't expected it to be here in the open, which meant either it had been moved recently or it had been so deeply buried in the room's ambient magic that nobody had ever flagged it as distinct. The prophecy room's collective hum would have masked it effectively, a signal lost in noise. He moved toward it. He'd brought the sword. It was under his robes, the same as before, the castle having made the logistics manageable before he left. Harry. Hermione. Her voice had a specific quality. He stopped. Turned. She was looking at a shelf to his left. Her face was doing something complicated. She had her wand raised slightly, not in a combat position but in the way of someone who has seen something that requires a response and hasn't decided yet what the response is. One of the prophecy orbs was glowing brighter than the others. Not dramatically, just distinctly, a warmer light, a slightly faster spin. The label at its base had 2 names on it. He could read them from where he stood. T. M. Riddle and H. J. Potter. He looked at it for a moment. This was the prophecy. The one Voldemort had sent Death Eaters here for in Harry's dreams, the ones he'd redirected here, the object that had driven the entire architecture of the last year's threat. He'd already heard the prophecy from Dumbledore. He knew its contents. He didn't need the sphere. But Voldemort didn't know he'd heard it. Voldemort's entire campaign to get Harry to the Ministry, the visions, the planted urgency, the belief that the only copy was here, had rested on Harry not knowing. Harry reached out and took the prophecy sphere from the shelf. It was warm in his hand, lighter than it looked, spinning with the particular energy of a thing that has been waiting to be held by the right person. He put it in his pocket. "Why are you taking it?" Ron asked. "Because he wants it," Harry said. "And I don't want him to have it." He turned back to the plinth. "Let's finish this." The Horcrux came apart differently from the diadem. The diadem had made that almost subsonic shriek, the collapsing inward sound. This locket screamed. Not loudly, the sound was contained, compressed, like a scream inside a box, but it was a genuine scream, furious and frightened and entirely without dignity, and it lasted approximately 4 seconds after the sword came down and then cut off so completely it was as though it had never been. Neville was watching the corridor with his wand out, which was the right call, and Luna was standing very still in the center of the room with her eyes slightly unfocused in the way that meant she was paying attention to something the rest of them couldn't quite access, and Ron had moved to Harry's other flank without being asked, and all of it felt right. The right people. The right room. Not triumphant exactly but correct, the feeling of something complicated executing as planned. 2 more down, Hermione said, counting under her breath. "At least 3 more to go," Harry said. "But not tonight." He could feel Hermione cataloging the remaining unknowns. She'd done the research, knew the theoretical upper limit of the Horcrux count, had been building a probability map for weeks. He let her catalog. It was useful. "Tonight we go home." Luna turned from whatever she'd been listening to. "Someone's coming," she said pleasantly. "From upstairs. 3 people." They felt the fluke connection. Harry felt it through the ring, not the castle's extended senses, which weren't available here, but the ring itself had a baseline sensitivity that was its own thing. The 4 founders combined magical awareness distilled into a physical object that he wore on his body. There was movement above them, a descending urgency. "How long?" Neville asked. 2 minutes, Luna said. "Maybe less." "They're moving quickly." Harry looked at the flow point they'd come through, a small fireplace set into the east wall of the outer chamber, green flame still faintly visible through the door. "We go," he said. "Now." They went in the same order they'd arrived, Luna first, then Neville, then Ron, then Hermione. Harry waited at the chamber door for a full 30 seconds, listening to the footsteps coming down from above, and felt, briefly, cleanly, the presence of one of the approaching people separate itself from the other 2. Different magical signature. Not ministry. He thought about that signature. He stood very still for 1 extra second and let the ring tell him what it could. Cold intelligence. Old fear. Grandiose certainty, and underneath it a terror so fundamental it had become structural, load-bearing, the thing the entire architecture rested on. Voldemort was here. Not in the flesh, not physically descending these stairs. But his awareness was riding one of the ministry officials coming down, the same way Harry had once felt him in Nagini, the same projection technique. Harry looked at the door for a moment. He was aware of the prophecy sphere in his pocket, the Horcrux locket shell on the plinth, the flue fire behind him. He was aware that he could step into the flue and be home in seconds, and Voldemort's awareness would arrive in this room to find nothing, no one, the aftermath of a clean operation completed without drama. He was also aware that the time for letting Voldemort be uncertain about what he was dealing with had passed. He pulled the prophecy sphere from his pocket. He held it up in the room's dim light, in the direction of the door, where Voldemort's projected awareness would be arriving in approximately 30 seconds. He let it sit there in his hand. Obvious. Deliberate. Then he stepped into the flue. He came through into the Gryffindor common room, and the fire converted itself back to ordinary orange the moment he cleared it, sealing the connection with the efficiency of something that understood it was done. His friends were there. All four of them, in various states of post-adrenaline settling. Ron was sitting on the nearest sofa with his head in his hands, not distressed, just the position of someone whose nerves have finished processing an experience and would like a moment. Hermione was standing with her arms crossed and her eyes too bright, which was her version of the same thing. Neville was at the window. Luna was already sitting cross-legged on the hearth rug. He was there, Harry said. Voldemort. Not in person. Projecting. He felt the Horcrux, Hermione said immediately. He felt it destroyed. Or he tracked the flue anomaly. Either way, he knows now that I have the sphere. Harry set it on the mantelpiece. The warm glow of it lit the bottom of Hermione's face. He knows I was in his room. He knows I took it and destroyed what he'd left and walked out. He paused. He's going to come now. Not through tunnels or feints. When? Neville asked, from the window. I don't know. Soon. He felt the castle around him, warm and settled, solid, the deep nighttime breathing of a building that knew its people were safe inside it. But on my terms. Not his. Hermione looked at him. How do you make it on your terms? I don't go to him, Harry said. I let him come to me. He spent the next 36 hours in the Founder's chamber. Alone, mostly, with Hermione coming and going with translations and questions, and twice with food that he ate without really tasting. He was working through the final sections of the wall text, the parts the diadem had made accessible, the deeply conditional passages that only resolved to meaning when read by someone who had used all four objects and understood what they carried. What they carried, it turned out, was a specific kind of magic that had no name in any modern classification system, because the modern classification system had been built after the period in which this magic was practiced. The Founders had called it, in their 4 different scripts, for different things that all translated to roughly the same idea, the magic of inheritance that becomes. Not inherited power in the sense of receiving something from someone else. Inherited power in the sense of becoming the distillation of everything that came before. Not their individual abilities, their combined intention. What they had collectively wanted Hogwarts to be, what they had collectively wanted wizarding education to be, what they had together hoped 1,000 years of students would become. Harry read it until he understood it not as text but as fact. On the second morning, he sat in Gryffindor's chair and held all 4 objects simultaneously, sword across his knees, cup in his left hand, diadem on his head, locket open in his right palm, and let the combined magic of all 4 of them move through the ring and through him, and he didn't direct it. He just let it be. Let it find its own level the way water finds its own level, without interference or instruction. The chamber was very warm for approximately 10 minutes. When he put everything down, he felt completely calm. Not the performed calm of someone suppressing feeling. The genuine calm of someone who has found the bottom of a deep water and knows where the ground is. He went upstairs. Voldemort came on a Saturday morning. The castle knew before Harry did, which was interesting, for the first time in 36 hours the castle's perimeter awareness didn't register external pressure but internal recognition, the way a building recognizes a specific person's arrival not by seeing them but by something that preceded them, the magical equivalent of a smell. Harry was at breakfast again. He set down his pumpkin juice and was still. Around him, the great hall continued its morning. Students eating, talking, the ambient noise of 400 people beginning their day. He didn't stand up yet. He finished his toast. He put his napkin down. Harry, Ron said. I know. He looked at Hermione. Seal the hall. Tell McGonagall. Send the DA to their corridor positions, defensive only, nobody engages anything externally. The castle will handle the boundary. Hermione stood up so quickly her chair scraped. Her expression was controlled and her hands were steady and he loved her for both. Harry, I'll come back, he said. I'm going to meet him at the gates. Neville stood up. I'll come. No. He put a hand on Neville's shoulder, brief and firm. You're needed here. If anything gets through the boundary, which it won't, but if, I need the best person I have running the interior. That's you. Neville looked at him. He sat back down, not happily, but with the quality of someone who has understood the assignment and will execute it. Don't do anything stupid, he said. Define stupid. You know what I mean. Harry did. I'll be fine. He walked out of the great hall and the doors opened for him without his touching them. Voldemort was at the gates. Not surrounded by Death Eaters, he'd come with 4, arranged behind him in the way powerful men arrange attendants, present but decorative, not part of the calculation. He was tall in a way the photographs never quite captured, thin in a way that suggested the thinness was chosen rather than natural, the body shaped by will and magic into something that had moved past ordinary human proportion. His face was a smooth, white, inhuman precision, no nose, reduced down to slits, red eyes that had the quality of something that had burned away the parts of the eyes that hold uncertainty. He was standing at the Hogwarts gates as though he owned them, which was the only way he knew how to stand anywhere. Harry walked down the path from the castle doors to the gates at a normal pace. The October morning was bright and cold, proper autumn, frost on the grass, the lake very still and silver to his left. He felt the castle at his back, the full weight of it, 1,000 years of deliberate protective magic, the ward line running from his feet outward in both directions like something physical. He stopped 20 feet from the gate and looked at Voldemort. Voldemort looked at him. There was something in his expression that Harry recognized from the graveyard 2 years ago, the specific hunger of someone for whom power is a permanent hunger, never satisfied, always looking for the next consumption. But there was something else now too. Something that had been modified by the events of the week, by the failed attack, by the destroyed Horcruxes, by the image of Harry standing at the ministry holding the prophecy sphere. Uncertainty. Very small. Controlled. But there. Harry Potter, Voldemort said, and his voice had the quality Harry remembered, the sound of something beautiful that was also wrong in a fundamental way, like music played in a key that made your teeth ache. You have been very busy. Yes, Harry said. Voldemort's gaze went to the gate, to the ward line it represented. You will invite me in. No. A silence. The 4 Death Eaters behind Voldemort shifted slightly. Voldemort himself didn't move, which was its own kind of response. You believe the castle protects you. The castle protects everyone inside it, Harry said. That's what it's for. He paused. You could come in through the gate without an invitation. You could try. You'd find it considerably more difficult than you expect. You think very highly of inherited toys, Voldemort said, and the contempt was perfectly constructed, beautiful in its precision. A ring and an old castle's affection. You have gathered trinkets, boy, while I have spent 50 years, building things you're afraid to lose, Harry said. Yes. I know. He kept his voice even. Not casual, exact. You made 7 of them, didn't you? 7 vessels for pieces of yourself, because the idea of ceasing to exist was so unbearable that you would rather be distributed across objects than whole and mortal. Something moved in Voldemort's red eyes. Not quite anger. Closer to the feeling of a wound being touched in a place that was supposed to be armored. How many do I have now? Harry continued. The diary. The diadem. The locket at the ministry. He paused. That's 3. Ring, cup, snake, and whatever's left of you from the night you tried to kill me. That's at least 4 more. You're not as defended as you were 2 weeks ago. You destroyed. Voldemort stopped. The stop itself was the tell. The stop of someone who had registered information they hadn't expected to have confirmed. The ones I know about, Harry said. Working on the rest. Voldemort was silent. He looked at Harry with the focused totality of his attention, and Harry understood that this was what it felt like to have something truly dangerous concentrate on you, not the human version of danger, not Umbridge's petty power or Malfoy's inherited contempt, but something that had chosen to be predatory so completely and for so long that predation was now its only register. Harry looked back. He found the thing Slytherin's memory had shown him, the understanding of fear as the betrayal of magic, and held it, and thought about what it meant to face something that had chosen fear as its architecture and have chosen something different. Voldemort raised his wand. Harry didn't move. Not because he was frozen. Not because he was brave in the performed sense, the gritted teeth courage of someone overriding terror. He didn't move because the castle was behind him and within him and the ward line was precisely where it needed to be, and Voldemort's wand was raised from outside the ward line, which meant the spell would encounter. Harry asked the castle, just before it was cast, to meet it, Avada Kedavra. The killing curse left Voldemort's wand in a flash of green that had no warmth in it, no light in the way of warmth-producing light, just the absence of life in visible form. It hit the ward line. What happened wasn't a deflection in the conventional sense, it wasn't the curse bouncing back like a rubber ball. The ward line, carrying Harry's intent and the castle's full weight and 1,000 years of protective magic built by 4 people who had constructed this place specifically to be a sanctuary for children, simply refused it. The green light spread outward along the ward line in both directions, thin and fast, and then went out, like a match dropped in water. The silence afterward was enormous. Voldemort stared at where the curse had gone. Harry watched him do it. He watched Voldemort process the information, that the killing curse, the signature weapon, the thing that had made him effectively invincible in combat for 50 years, had been refused by a ward line like a visitor turned away at the door. Then Harry walked to the gate. He put his hand on the iron, and the gate opened inward, not to invite Voldemort in, but because the gate opened toward Hogwarts and Harry was on Hogwarts' side, and this was the gate coming to him. He stood in the gateway. The ward line ran through it. I know what you are, Harry said. And he meant it in a complete sense. He'd held Slytherin's locket, heard Slytherin's voice, understood the line of inheritance that ran from Slytherin's ancient family through the centuries to a boy named Tom Riddle who had been given the gift of magic and had made it his only identity and then had become terrified of what happened if that identity was taken away. I know what you started as and I know what you chose and I know what the choices cost. Voldemort looked at him. In his red eyes, and this was the strangest thing, the thing Harry hadn't expected, there was something that was almost recognition. Not of Harry. Of something Harry was naming. Something Voldemort had not heard named in a very long time because everyone around him was either devoted or dead and neither category was inclined toward honesty. You can't stop it, Voldemort said. What I am now. I know, Harry said. Not today. Not with words. He felt, through the ring, the specific locations of the remaining Horcruxes. His own understanding of them had clarified over the 36 hours in the chamber, the diadem clarity combining with everything he'd learned about Voldemort's mind over 5 years of accidental connection. He knew where they were. He knew the sequence. He knew the end of the road. But I know exactly where your remaining pieces are, he said. And I'm going to take them apart one by one. Not because I hate you. He paused. Because you were meant for something else and you chose fear instead, and every person you've killed or broken chose something different and deserved to keep choosing. He said this not as a speech and not as a condemnation. He said it as a fact. The same way he told Umbridge the decrees were void and told Dawlish the summons was invalid, just naming the actual state of things without decoration. Voldemort raised his wand again. 2 of the Death Eaters moved forward. Harry closed the gate. He turned and walked back toward the castle, and behind him he heard the spells hit the ward line and the ward line handle them the way a stone wall handles rain, comprehensively, without drama, without any particular effort. He walked up the path with the castle in front of him and the October morning bright and cold and the lake silver to his left, and he didn't look back, because there was nothing behind him that required his attention. Voldemort left. Harry felt it at the ward line, the particular quality of presence withdrawing, like a storm moving off, the pressure drop afterward. He stopped on the castle steps and breathed. He felt the castle breathe with him. Slow, old, enormous, a building that had been standing on this specific piece of Scotland for over 1,000 years, through wars and ministry interference and headmasters of varying wisdom and students of every conceivable background, and had been waiting, in the specific patient way of things built with intention, for someone to come along and recognize what it was actually for. Not a political symbol. Not a ministry asset. Not a stage for power games between adult wizards with complicated histories. A school. A place where children came to learn what they could do, and were protected while they learned it, and left knowing more than they'd arrived with. That was all. And it was everything. He went inside. The common room that night was full. Not just Gryffindors. McGonagall had quietly stopped enforcing the house boundary curfews 2 days ago, a decision she'd made without announcement and nobody had challenged, and the result was that by 9 o'clock the common room had Hufflepuffs and Ravenclaws and even 4 Slytherins, one of whom was Malfoy, who sat in a corner chair with a drink of pumpkin juice and the careful neutrality of someone who had decided they were here and was fully committed to that decision. Harry sat by the fire. Ron was next to him. Hermione had her notes but she wasn't reading them. "You let him go," Ron said. "Not an accusation. Checking understanding." "Today I did," Harry said. "The remaining Horcruxes first. Then him. That's the order. Where are the others?" "One is at Gringotts Lestrange Vault." He'd confirmed this through the diadem-enhanced clarity and the ring's combined awareness. "One is," he paused. He'd known this one for a while. Had been circling it. Had been letting himself not fully know it because knowing it fully meant deciding what to do about it. "One is here. In this school. In me." The fire crackled. "What?" Ron said. "The night he tried to kill me," Harry said. "When his curse reflected. Part of what happened is that a fragment of his soul, unintentional, he didn't mean to do it, attached itself to the only living thing in the room." Hermione had gone very still. "Harry. I know. Are you?" "I'm not dead," he said dryly. "The fragment's there. I've known it in a vague way since second year, when the diary felt familiar. I know it precisely now." He looked at the fire. "Dumbledore knows too. I've known he knows since the night in his office. He's been trying to work out how to tell me." "What does it mean?" Ron asked. His voice had gone careful, the voice he used when something was serious enough to require care rather than instinct. "It means there's a version of this that ends with me dying," Harry said plainly. "If the fragment in me has to be destroyed before Voldemort can be killed, then at some point I need to be," he stopped. "Restarted. At some point the fragment needs to leave me without the living part coming with it." Hermione was reading something in her notebook. She'd turned to it without fully deciding to, reflexive research instinct, and she was moving through pages with the focus speed of someone cross-referencing. "The fragment attached involuntarily," she said. "To a living host. A deliberate Horcrux is embedded in an object. An involuntary one is," she stopped. Looked at him. It's not the same structure. It can't be. Keep going, Harry said. If it's not the same structure, it might be separable by different means. Not the sword. Not venom. Something that targets the fragment without. She was already 2 thoughts ahead of herself. He could see her arrive at something. Harry. The Founder's magic. The tradition of inheritance that becomes. The chamber's wall text in the section about restoration, the one that describes how old magic can repair fractures in a person's. She looked at him with wide, calculating eyes. I need 3 hours with the full translation. You have all night, he said. She stood up and left the common room at a near run, which for Hermione in research mode was perfectly ordinary locomotion. Ron watched her go. She's going to solve it, he said. I know. You knew she would before you told her. Yes. Ron absorbed this. Was that why you told her tonight instead of earlier? Partly. He paused. Partly because I needed to say it out loud to know I wasn't afraid of it. And are you? He thought about the fragment in him. He felt for it the way he could now feel for specific things. It was there, small and old and sullen, pressed up against the edges of his own magic like a splinter in deep tissue. It wasn't comfortable. But it wasn't in charge. It had never been in charge, even when it had seemed like it was giving him things. Parseltongue, the connection to Voldemort's mind, it had been there as a passenger in something that was already moving in its own direction. No, Harry said. I know what it is and where it is and what it needs. Being afraid of it doesn't change any of those things. Ron looked at him for a long moment. The fire caught the ring's colors and ran them across the rug between them. You've changed, Ron said. Since the night in Dumbledore's office. I know. Not in a bad way. Just, he thought about it. More like you. If that makes sense. It does. Like you stopped letting other people's emergencies about you become your emergency about you. Harry looked at him. He stopped. That's actually exactly right. Ron looked pleased in the private way he had, the satisfaction of a correct observation made without performance. I have moments, he said, for the second time in several weeks, and grinned. Across the room, Malfoy caught Harry's eye. He held it for a moment, and something moved in his expression, complex and specific and not entirely resolved, and then he looked back at his pumpkin juice. Harry let him. There were things that needed time to find their form. Malfoy would find it. Or he wouldn't. But the door was there. Luna drifted over and sat on the hearthrug near Harry's feet with the ease of someone for whom there are no real boundaries between where they are and where they belong. She'll find it, she said. Hermione. The method. She tilted her head. The fragment will leave you the way a dream leaves when you wake up. There's a moment of transition and then it's over and you're still there and it's not. He looked at her. How do you know that? She considered. I don't, exactly. But it's true anyway. She said it with the complete confidence of someone whose relationship to truth was different enough from most people's that the usual distinction between knowing and feeling didn't apply. He thought about his mother. About the night she'd died, or rather the night she'd stepped between a killing curse and her baby son, and the love of that act had embedded itself in his skin as a protection that nothing Voldemort had thrown at him for 5 years had managed to breach. He thought about what Dumbledore had told him once, that his mother's sacrifice had left a mark deeper than any magic, and thought about the castle's magic, which was essentially the same thing, for people's love for what they'd built embedded in the stone over 1,000 years, the accumulated intention of people who cared so much about this place that they'd left the best of themselves in the walls. His mother. Slytherin, leaving the best of himself behind. Gryffindor, with 30 years of friendship in his voice telling Slytherin to do it. The castle itself, waiting. The love of people who were gone stayed. That was the thing. It didn't diminish or decay or fracture into pieces the way fear did. It stayed, in skin and stone and the walls of old buildings and children who hadn't been born yet when it was first felt. He thought he might understand now what he was, in a way that had nothing to do with prophecy. He wasn't a weapon. He wasn't a symbol. He was the place where 1,000 years of people choosing love over fear had converged, and the castle had recognized it, and the ring had confirmed it, and Voldemort would eventually have to meet it. Not yet. There was still work to do. Horcruxes to find, Hermione's solution to hear out, Dumbledore's conversations to have, and a ministry to keep from meddling in things it didn't understand. A school to run, because somebody had to do it, and the person the castle had selected was currently sitting by a fire at 9 in the evening and not particularly interested in delegating. He looked around the common room. 4 houses in one space, quietly. Neville near the window reading something that wasn't a textbook, his posture different from the Neville who'd arrived at Hogwarts 5 years ago, more settled in his own dimensions. The 4 Slytherins in their corner, uncertain but here. The Hufflepuffs who'd been in the corridor during the attack, none of whom had run. Luna on the hearth rug, somewhere between here and elsewhere and entirely at peace with the distance. Ron next to him, steady as ever, wearing the expression of someone who has decided that wherever this goes, they'll be there for it. Harry thought about the choice Salazar Slytherin had described, the one where fear becomes the only architecture, where everything gets built around the thing you're most afraid of losing. He thought about Tom Riddle, 11 years old, arriving at this school for the first time, probably with something close to wonder in him, probably genuinely amazed by what magic was, and then watching that wonder curdle over years into acquisition and then into terror. He thought about his own 11-year-old self, arriving at King's Cross with a broken trunk and an owl and no idea what was about to happen, and how the castle had felt when he first saw it, enormous and lit and more like home than anywhere he'd ever been. He'd been right, that first time. He just hadn't known all the reasons why yet. He would finish what needed to be finished. He would find the remaining Horcruxes, Gringotts, and then the question of his own, and he would deal with them one at a time, methodically, with his friends beside him and the castle behind him and the 4 founders' combined magic running through a ring on his right hand. And when Voldemort came again, Harry would be on his own ground, and the ground would know him. And when it was over, when the last Horcrux was gone and Tom Riddle's long, frightened, destructive life was finally finished, Harry was going to come back to this school. Not as a student only. As what the castle had made him, had recognized him as, had been patiently waiting 1,000 years to say out loud. The Lord of the Founders wasn't a title he'd chosen or sought. It had been given to him by 4 people who'd built something extraordinary and trusted, against all sensible odds, that someone would come along to receive it. He was going to honor that trust the way they'd honored their students, completely, without reservation, with the understanding that the point of all of it was never the power itself but what you did with it. He would open the sealed parts of the school's curriculum. He would make the Founders' Chamber accessible to every student who showed the curiosity to find it, not immediately, not all at once, not without care, but eventually. He would make Hogwarts what it had been designed to be, before politics and history and ministry interference and Voldemort's shadow had narrowed it into something smaller than itself. He would make it a school. The fire burned. The castle breathed. The ring was warm on his finger, for colors running quiet and sure, red and gold and green and silver, the argument that had been going on for 1,000 years finally, in one person, resolved. Harry Potter sat in Gryffindor Tower in his 5th year at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, and he was exactly where he was supposed to be, and he knew exactly what came next, and he was not afraid of any of it. Outside, the lake was still and silver in the dark. Inside, the castle kept its people warm.